pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll with Planet.
Water tower supply!
Flight downside of speed off. Speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Hello, everybody. What's up, Tank Watchers? I'm Jack Beyer, hosting this beginning of the live stream today. You can see in front of you there is Starship serial number 10 on Pad A, and we are expecting a cryogenic proof test today. Residents have gotten an overpressure notice, which, you know, might indicate some other testing is possible, but we don't think those overpressure notices are necessarily good indicators of what's going on. Maybe more of just a cover the bases kind of thing. But as you can see, like I said, Starship serial number 10, look at that vent. Look at it go. So you can see some frost there by the aft flaps, and you can see it is an active vehicle right now. So it looks like they are currently in the stages of conducting a cryogenic proof test. So that is why we are live today, and that is what we are hoping to see. And as always, on the stream, we've got Michael Baylor running stuff in the background, pulling all the various steampunk levers.
Yep.
Michael, what's up?
I'm doing well, and if something is wrong, let me know in chat. We totally were in a rush to get ready because this test started up quite quickly, but it looks like chat is saying 5x5 and good audio, so that is a good start so far.
Excellent. Yeah, I forgot to do the whole DOS thing of saying, can you hear me? 5x5. Let me 5x5 in chat. But great. I'm glad to know that you guys can hear us. And I do believe we are getting another feed spooled up from, of course, Mary, who is out there. Boca Chica gal. Is this that feed, Michael?
Yeah, that is Mary's feed.
Nice. Yeah, you can see it's just a much better quality camera. Much closer view.
The flare stack, it has some venting coming out of it right now on Mary's camera.
And that's really interesting behavior we've started to see lately from that flare stack. It no longer flares, seemingly it just vents. And petition to change the name to vent stack. But yeah, it looks like, you know, like I said, tank farm is active. The vehicle is slightly frosty. You can even see just barely there's some vapors coming out from underneath the aft section there. So that is indicative of liquid nitrogen having been loaded onto the vehicle as part of this cryogenic proof test.
Yeah, people are going to be asking, why don't we think it's a static fire? Well, here are the signs you can see right now at the pad. There is very little venting from the tank farm. The methane recondenser is not on, and we are seeing frost on Starship. For a static fire, normally we would not see frosting and venting like this early in the countdown. Sometimes we see a little bit of frost at the bottom during a static fire, but they don't put much repellent in the tanks for a static fire. So right now, we're going to see, most likely, if this goes like the previous cryogenic proof test, we should see the tanks get quite frosty because they put a lot more LN2 in for a proof test than propellant in for a static fire test.
Yeah, that makes sense. And those periodic vents that we're seeing, they look a lot like what we like to call pressure maintenance venting, where sort of, you know, as the liquid nitrogen in the tank is heating up, they want to maintain, you know, whatever pressure that they need for testing, and so periodically they will vent a little bit of that gaseous nitrogen off, and sort of keep things in the corridor that they're wanting it to be in. Sort of, I mean, in a lot of ways it looks similar to when they test the test tanks, like 7.2 there you can see on the right side of the screen. Because again, that's all cryogenic proof tests, and there's another one of those vents. That's not a depress vent. That's not you know, the classic double depress vent that we always look for when they're doing static fire attempts or flight attempts. That looks like there is there is liquid nitrogen in that liquid oxygen tank, and it is warming up, and they are periodically releasing some of that pressure. But that is a proof test, right? It's like a giant steel balloon, and they are hoping to you know, make double, triple sure that steel balloon can hold pressure, and this is how you do it with a whole bunch of liquid nitrogen, and yeah. So if you guys have any questions, don't forget you can @ NASASpaceflight in chat, and that helps us see your questions with some nifty software that Michael put together. And I will bring up the host panel right now. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, let us know. I see Kevin asking, is Jack finally home in LA or still in Texas? I am in LA, but we will see for how long. I mean, SN10 is ready to go, but good question there, Kevin. And really quick, a couple super chats. Colin Cleveland, thanks for the $2. They ask, will there be heat shield tiles on both sides of the flaps? I think with 10 and 11, we see some tiles on the leeward side, on the back of Starship, that isn't subjected to re-entry heating, which is an interesting placement for that. I'm curious as to what's going on there, because our understanding is that there won't be heat shield tiles on the leeward side. So good question, Colin. I'm not quite sure how that's all going to play out at this point. It looks like they might just be testing attach points.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say for sure. I mean, I think on the space shuttle you had a little bit of wrapping of those thermal protection tiles around the edges of the wings, sort of,
Yep.
as the plasma probably kind of hits the wings and goes around both sides of it. But the flaps are probably going to be folded back more than they are. Like, they're probably going to be folded back at a steeper angle than they are in the space shuttle, if I had to guess, during re-entry. So I'm not sure how much of that would be needed on Starship. It will be interesting to see how much or how little the back side of the flaps have thermal protection tiles. But on Starship SN10, you can't really see it right now because the aft flaps are folded back. But there are actually heat shield tiles on the leftmost aft flap on the side opposite of the re-entry side. So that's kind of interesting. I think those are probably just a test to see how well they stay on. I'm not sure those are necessarily indicative of the final placement of thermal protection tiles on the aft flaps, but it will definitely be interesting to see where and where not the flaps end up being needed on future starships.
Yeah,
Or,
and
excuse me, the tiles, not the flaps.
and that honestly, that makes me immediately think of the space shuttle, because you brought it up, Michael. I swear I'm not Chris B. I'm Jack B. But no, the space shuttle utilized multiple different thermal protection materials, right? It wasn't just tiles. They also used that reinforced carbon on the leading edge of the wing, and they also used thermal blankets on various portions of the vehicle that didn't experience quite as much heating as the underside of the vehicle. So that makes me immediately wonder if and what we will see in terms of Starship multiple different types of thermal protection system. Will they only do the tiles? Will there be tiles and perhaps some sort of thermal blankets on the leeward side, or what is going to be necessary there? Because we do know that the stainless steel can take a lot more heat than, say, like aluminum that the frame of the space shuttle was made out of. But very good question from Colin, and I just have more questions now. John Sweet, thank you for the $5. They say, am I calculating this correct? Starship payload volume is the same as the interior volume of a fort. What? I don't think it's that much. I think the payload volume of Starship is like 1,100 square feet or cubic feet or something like that. Last time I remember that being calculated. I think 4,750 is way, 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 way high. But thank you for the support there, buddy. Michael Pierce, thanks for the new membership. KD, thanks for the 20 pounds. Say hello, you guys are awesome. You're awesome, KD, for helping us bring this content to people around the world. Thanks for the 20 pounds. It's a lot of money. Richard, thank you for the $5. Praising us. Thank you for the praise. I will bask in it. They say, NSF, love what you guys do and always appreciate your commentary and your efforts to provide accurate info as possible. Keep it up. Yep, we will do what we can. We don't want to string anybody along. We don't want to make stuff up. If we don't know something, I think there's virtue in saying we don't know, We're not just going to make stuff up and lie to you. Moldy Space, thanks for the $2. They say, Merry Fan Club. Here, here, Moldy Space. And, wow, Robert Hobson. Robert Hobson with a $100 super chat says, I'm working and can't think of anything witty to put here. Apologies. Don't apologize, Bob Hobb. And thank you. You are a legendary level supporter. Am I making up levels now? You are a legendary tier supporter. Which I guess is now a thing, and don't ever apologize for not putting something there. We'll find a way to waffle and dither about whatever you put, no matter what, for like 5 minutes. You know us. But seriously, thank you, Bob Hobb. You are a key member of our members and of our supporters. So thank you so much. And Brandon Magruder with a new membership. Awesome. Thanks for the new membership, buddy. Let's see. I'm going to go through some of your questions here. Danny, that's a good question. Danny asking, think we'll see some reaction control system testing during Cryo like we saw for serial number 9? That's always a possibility. I mean, a lot of these tests, I think SpaceX has used the terminology as risk buy down, which strikes me in a lot of ways as like corporate speak. But in truth, you do the tests to make sure that the things that you expect the vehicle to do, it will actually do when it comes time and it's actually in flight. So testing that RCS system, the reaction control system, is not something we can say definitely won't or definitely will happen. It's always a possibility. It's always a treat when you get those. I mean, with Starhopper, they were doing it. I think I caught like 4 or 5 separate ones just in the time that I was there for Starhopper. So they do like their RCS tests, and so do I. DYU, what's asking when Jack and kayak? Oh man, kayak. I do need to take that to Boca one of these next times. Let's see. Bum, bum, bum. North Carolina Cars asking, do you think they will make a Pad C? Okay, SpaceX and naming isn't always the most clear thing. I would argue that the orbital pad is Pad C, but it's different than the suborbital pads, so maybe it's like Pad A1. I don't know. I don't think they plan currently to make another suborbital pad. I think A and B are sufficient for what they are doing, but we do not, we don't have any, too much insight into that other than, say, FAA documents and stuff like that. And we haven't seen any requests from SpaceX, environmentally or FAA or otherwise, to put up a Pad C. But good question. Yeah, and John Sweet following up with that first question about the payload volume, 3,800 cubic feet or 1,100 meters cubed. Oh, so it was meters is what I was thinking. Basically the same pressurized volume as the ISS, which is just madness for a single vehicle and a single launch. Looking back at the vehicle now, you can see the vent stack, which is what I'm going to call the flare stack now, is going. It looks like it's frosty. Do you see that, Michael?
Yeah, it seems to have a lot of liquid nitrogen, or at least I don't know if it's liquid form as it's going through the stack, or if it's already gas by that point. But in any event, very cold nitrogen flowing through that stack right now.
Yeah, indeed. My vehicle's venting a little bit. Is that one of the tri-vents that's pointed at us right now?
I don't think so. I think that's a smaller vent we see above it, but I'm not positive.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Very cool. James Deuce asking when hop. We don't know. Also, you don't need the H in there, just WEN, when hop.
Soon.
Yeah, very soon. Jonathan asking, does SpaceX have to submit public plans or get consent for what they build at Boca? Yeah, I do believe that they have to submit environmental assessments, and they have to tell the FAA what they, any modifications to their plans. So I'm not quite sure if there's like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like the planning's been in the basement for the last 4 years or whatever. You just had to go look at it. I don't know if there's anything quite like that, but SpaceX does have to get approval for what they are building.
Yeah.
Roanne asking, where is DAS? DAS is working on more robots.
The robot factory is in action, scrambling to beat SN10 so that we get more improved hardware out there for SN10. So DAS is in a race against time. Looks like SN10 is coming along quite quickly. We already saw 3 Raptors be installed, so if the cryogenic proof test today looks good, we could see a static fire later this week, followed by launch in the coming days after that. So not far away, in the best case scenario, from a flight test of SN10. So that is why DAS is scrambling to get some robot upgrades done in time for SN10's flight test.
Yep, and good thing. I mean, SpaceX is not slowing down or resting, and neither is DAS and the robot factory. I mean, I'm starting to think, Michael, that this is going to be the pace that we're just going to see from here on out. I mean, just look at SN10 or SN11 the other day got its nose cone in the high bay. We might even be, depending on if there's any delays, or say when they do a static fire with 10, they have to do a Raptor swap or any kind of minor delay like that to 10's flight. I bet we see 2 Starships on the pad again. I mean, I think Chris B tweeted that the other day. It's crazy the pace that they're going at, and yeah, no slowing down in Boca Chica, so no slowing down with the robots on DAS's part. We thank him for it. Let's see what we got. Amy asking, do we know which Raptor failed on serial number 9? I don't think we know like specifically what serial numbered Raptor was the culprit there. Just one of the 2 landing Raptors. Let's see. Do we know which Raptor engines have been installed on serial number 10? Where did that go? Where did that go? There we go. I think Raptor 50, which is a relatively new one. Raptor 39, which we saw installed briefly on serial number 8 before being removed and presumably repaired. And then a third Raptor, which I don't think we got eyes on the serial number on that third Raptor. But it does have all 3 Raptors, which is quite, you know, they very quickly installed those 3 Raptors on there.
So I think, is 39 the first Raptor to be installed on 2 different Starships?
I don't feel comfortable saying definitively, but that sounds right to me. I do feel like maybe one of the Raptors that... no, I think that's the first time that's happened. I can't recall that having happened previously.
And of course, there is one Raptor that is not marked, so it's possible the other Raptor on SN10 right now also could have been, you know, like I think 46 or something was uninstalled on SN9, so perhaps one of those Raptors could have been repaired and installed again on SN10.
Yeah, I do wonder if we start seeing Starships land, if they will start reusing Raptors. You know, whenever they start sticking landings, I don't necessarily think that they will reuse an individual Starship, given that they have so many in production. But I could see them reusing Raptors. But it's just, you know, one of those things we're kind of have to wait and see, right?
A lot more activity from the tank farm now.
Yeah, the vent stack is really going.
And there's some venting behind it too on the near Starhopper, but
yeah, by those horizontal white tanks, you can see there's at least one vent that is pretty vigorous. I mean, look at that. You can see it's the column of vapor is rising up almost halfway up that weather station there on top of that black vertical tank to the left of Starhopper. Yeah, look at that. The view from the one of the robot cameras there.
if you go back to the Raptor part briefly that you were just mentioning, Jack, you know, Elon has said in his recent tweet where he had 3 priorities for Starship, and one of them was enough Raptors for the super heavy booster to launch something into orbit. So perhaps they will be trying to conserve as many Raptors as possible for the Starship test so that they can start building out a fleet of Raptors to install on a super heavy booster.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super curious how the first super heavy boosters are going to play out. How many Raptors will get installed on them? What's the minimum number of Raptors necessary to launch a full stack? Even if the Starship doesn't come back, or just burns up on reentry, just to try and get the feel of how it's so many questions on how this test campaign is going to proceed, but totally could see them starting to reuse Raptors at some point. And I do find it interesting that in that list of 3 items that Elon gave, none of those items was Raptor, right? Like, it was other sort of infrastructural type things, and to me that says Raptor is not the long pole in all of this.
It was Raptor in terms of production, not Raptor in terms of technical, is what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So, perhaps, the Raptor vacuum, and I don't know if we're going to see the Raptor boost variant. I don't know if that's... So Elon said the outer ring of super heavy Raptors would be a special variant of Raptors optimized for more thrust instead of... They would basically sacrifice gimbal capability in favor of more thrust. but I'm not sure if there's, more the higher thrust variant of Raptor. I'm not sure if that's required to reach orbit, or if they can just use the current version of Raptor to reach orbit. I'm also not sure if, obviously the vacuum optimized version of Raptor is optimal for in-orbit maneuvering of a Starship vehicle, but SpaceX at one point was planning to first just use the sea-level Raptors in space. Well, only the sea-level Raptors in space, and they are going to use the sea-level Raptors in space to steer, even with the current Starship plan. So I'm not sure if either of the vacuum-optimized Raptor or the thrust-optimized version of Raptor are actually required for the first orbital flights. Obviously, those versions will be wanted in the future, but those may not be the long-pull items that Elon is most concerned about in order to make orbital flight possible.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Raptor item was make more Raptors, basically, not necessarily make Raptor more reliable or make Raptor better in some way. It's just they just need to start making more of them, which is very interesting.
They do seem to still be having some problems reliably starting up the Raptors. We obviously saw that with one Raptor on SN9's flight, but we also saw a pre-launch board with a Starship SN8 that was caused by the Raptors not starting up properly. So really getting that ignition sequence down is going to be critical for them, but not one of Elon's top 3 priorities. Maybe it's in the top 5.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's a full flow stage combustion engine, and you have 3 of them, and you're starting them in a staggered startup. And even just one, you need very, very, very precise timing to get the turbo pumps spun up and everything spun up just right. And then doing that in a staggered way with 3 separate Raptors, it's got to be tricky. But I think, igniting a Raptor versus the Raptor's reliability itself, to me that says, maybe the Raptor itself is fine. There's a problem with those sparking igniters or whatever that they use to ignite it. And if we're not using triethylborine, the TEB, that green flash that we always see with Falcon 9, we are just using, I think SpaceX just uses on Starship just a simple like sparkler style igniter, if I'm not mistaken. So perhaps some more work needs to be done there, or maybe it's something to do with timing in terms of turbo pump startup or spin up. But yeah, I don't think Raptor is necessarily like in a bad way. I think Raptor is meeting expectations. I mean, it's just a matter of getting them started up right?
Yep, and if you look at Starship right now, we're not really seeing that frost line increase much. That's the next thing we're looking to see on a timeline, but right now, that frost line is holding towards the bottom, so keep an eye on that. But it seems like the tank farm activity is definitely picking up, but not a lot of increase in frost. If anything, the frost has gone down slightly over the past minute or so. So we'll keep an eye on that. But
Here's a question. Oh, go for it.
Hit me with the questions with what I was going to say as you did that. So go ahead, Jack.
Nice. Here's one that I think I know the answer to, but I'm not positive. John asking, do the turbo pumps require helium to spin start? I think yes, but I'm not positive. Do you have any insight into that, Michael?
Yes, we do. We see a lot of COPVs in the skirt of Starship, and a few times you've gotten photos of it, so it seems very possible to me. I'm not entirely sure on that, and I think they might be trying to move away from helium as much as possible in terms of the long-term, use of the Starship vehicle. You don't want to be having to refill helium on Mars if you can avoid it. So,
yep.
I'm not sure if that's something they want to do long-term or not, but we have seen some COPVs on the bottom of the Starships. Perhaps that's what those are for.
Yeah, and if they're using it now, like you said, it's not necessarily doesn't mean they're going to use it always, but it's an iterative design system, right? They're going to get it working with what they can, and then they will move on to the harder problems. I mean, I'm sure autogenous pressurization is a challenge, and autogenous pressurization combined with starting up the Raptors, combined with not using another gas like nitrogen or helium or something to spin up. I mean, there's a reason I'm not a rocket scientist. It just hurts my head. It's a hard problem, and I'm glad there are a lot of smart people at SpaceX working on it. But good question from John there.
you can see a little bit of condensation forming on the top left side of the liquid oxygen tank on Starship right now, which of course they're using liquid nitrogen for today's test, most likely because they want to use an inert gas in case something were to go wrong. This is just a proof test. When we say the liquid oxygen in the methane tanks, we mean that liquid nitrogen is being put into what would be the liquid oxygen tank and the methane tank for a static fire or a flight test. But of course, for today's test, liquid nitrogen is what we believe is being used in both tanks. So the liquid oxygen tank on Starship is the lower tank, so it goes from about just below that frost ring is where the thrust puck, which is kind of the bottom bulkhead of the liquid oxygen tank is, and then the liquid oxygen tank stretches up towards the top, just about where that upper condensation point is on Starship right now. And then the methane tank, you can kind of see there's kind of lighter cutouts on the tank section above that. That's the methane tank, and then above that is the payload section and the nose cone. So 2 tanks sort of in the middle of Starship are the places we're going to look to see frost form today.
Let's see what else we got here. Cody Young asking, can you explain the purpose? Where'd it go? Oh, geez. Cody Young asking, can you explain the purpose of the cryo test versus just loading it like they would for static fire or flight? Well, that's kind of what Michael was just talking about, is if something were to go wrong, if this big steel balloon were to pop during this test, you don't want to have a whole bunch of liquid oxygen and a whole bunch of methane just wafting around, mixing and looking for an ignition source. That is not a good situation, as we saw with serial number 4. So the purpose of a cryo test like this is to verify that all systems and all pressure, holding parts of the vehicle can in fact hold that pressure, and you use an inert gas or liquid like liquid nitrogen, so that if something actually does pop, there is no big danger of explosion, deflagration, conflagration, whatever you want to call it, detonation, any of those things. Not going to happen with just boring old liquid nitrogen. So that is the purpose. It's just a safer way to pressure test the vehicle at the appropriate temperatures, because the liquid methane and liquid oxygen are all similar in temperature to the liquid nitrogen. They're all cryogenic liquids. Let's see, what else we got? Some good questions from everybody today.
Yeah, lots of people asking when hop in chat. I'm guessing people are still, joining the stream as we spool up here for the proof test. I will answer it again. We're not sure exactly when the launch will happen. We still need to see the proof test be successful. Hopefully that item will be checked off today. Then you got the static fire test, which we expect. We expect them to only need to do a minimum of 1 static fire test, although we thought the same with SN9, and SN9 ended up doing something like 6 static fires. So we'll see what happens with the static fire, but in the best case scenario, only 1 static fire, so that could happen Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, given the road closure set up and posted, and then once the static fire happens, within a couple of days they could fly. That's the best case scenario. Of course, the more realistic scenario is that things may go wrong, and they may need to do multiple static fire attempts. Perhaps the FAA could come into play again. The FAA probably won't be too much of a challenge if SpaceX does a 10-kilometer test flight, exactly like it did with SN9. But if SpaceX tries to go higher, say to 20 or 30 kilometers, then that would be an entirely different FAA approval process that they would have to go through again. Of course, the FAA will also be looking into the SN9 launch and making sure that anomaly has been taken into consideration for SN10's flight. So, again, I don't expect the FAA to be too much of a challenge, especially if they go to 10 kilometers again, but that is one thing to watch, as, of course, is technical readiness of Starship SN10. So, long story short, let's get through a good static fire, and then we will try to tell you when the hop will happen, but as for now, it is pretty much up in the air.
Let's see. Rough Riders show with 499. Thank you, Rough Riders. They say so they can proof test without the thrust simulators now. Also, what do you think they will do with serial number 11 if serial number 10 aces its flight? Maybe a higher flight. All right, so is there a difference in terminology, Michael, between a cryo proof and a cryo proof with the thrust rams?
I have not heard one.
Yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Like, I haven't seen Elon tweet something different for each type, so.
Yeah, so if you guys don't, if you're not familiar, there have been cryo proof tests where they install a thrust simulator on the mount on the sort of orbital mount there underneath Starship, and it consists of 3 hydraulic rams that push on the thrust section on the little aft bulkhead there to simulate the force of Raptors pushing on it during flight. And I don't think we saw that for serial number 9, and we're not seeing it for serial number 10. Obviously, there's Raptors installed on there, and you can't have the thrust simulator on there when Raptors are in the way. So, this is just a cryo proof without needing to use the thrust simulator. Perhaps they only need to do that when they are validating the design of a new bulkhead type or a new thrust puck type. And since we already know that those items in particular worked well for serial number 8 and serial number 9, they don't need to test the specific thrust rams on serial number 10. But they are still doing a cryo proof, which is interesting. And what do we think they will do with serial number 11 if serial number 10 aces its flight? What do you think, Michael? I think higher flight is a reasonable expectation if serial number 10 lands.
Yep, I think SN11 going higher is definitely possible. I'm also interested to see what the plan is for SN10. The current indications seem to indicate it's going to be similar to SN9, but at the same time, part of me wonders, the terminal velocity of a starship falling is going to be the same no matter how high you go. This is going to come in higher and have to slow down more the higher it goes. So the actual, final 20 seconds of flight might not change too much no matter how high you go. It's just the other portions of flight are a bit different. So I could actually see a justification for launching SN10 higher than SN9, but I have not seen any indication that SpaceX is actually going to do that. But still waiting to see what the final flight plan for SN10 is going to be. We have seen SpaceX change plans with flight tests at the last minute before, so kind of up in the air what exactly SN10 is going to do. But most likely SN10 will do a 10-kilometer test flight as well. So then SN11 would presumably go much higher.
Yeah, and that would make sense. And it would streamline things from an FAA standpoint if they're just doing the same thing over again and not changing the profile in any way.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably actually the best justification for doing the same flight again, is that if you do the same flight again, the FAA still might have to give a new launch license, but all the blast analysis and paperwork for that launch license will be pretty much the same. Whereas if you go to 50 kilometers or 80 kilometers or however high you want to go for the next test flight, that's entirely different paperwork for a lot of key aspects. So that kind of restarts the entire process from scratch.
That makes sense. Red Holly Music, thanks for the $5. Hellman, thank you for the $5. They say, thanks, peeps, for your excellent coverage. Here's funds for your production. Thank you. Stefanak, thank you for the new membership. Claire Saunders says, thank you guys for the continued, I don't think I've ever seen thank you abbreviated as TQ. TQ guys for the continued coverage. I love it when Jack's mind is blown. It makes me laugh. It's pretty easy to blow my mind, especially when crazy stuff happens on a regular basis. I mean, I love the Starship program. I'm glad you like my exasperated state. Matlin, thank you for the €5. So do we know what that ring-looking thing that flew away we saw for a frame on the SN9 hop was? I don't think so. Ring-looking thing. Does that ring any bells to you, Michael?
No, I think there was something on a scent that people saw. I'm not sure it's actually indicative of a problem. I think one of the things might have actually just been some vapor or something but I'm not sure exactly what they're referring to. If you
Yeah,
want to clarify in chat, was it something on ascent? Was it something on descent? Let us know.
Yeah, Matlin, at me or at Michael or somebody in chat, and I'll see if you can, if I understand your clarification there. And thank you for the support. CA&P Railroad, thank you for the $50. Holy cow. They say I missed my favorite live stream crew to chill with. Haha, because it's a cryo-proof, get it? Chill. Here to all the live streams, I forgot to pay my dues for SN9. Thank you so much, CA&P. We could not do what we do without the support of people like you and Bob Hobb, and everybody that is a member or a contributor or even just people that like and subscribe. So thank you. It's really fun to do this stuff and cover Starship, and we owe it to you all that we are able to do this. So thank you. Leonard Brahms, thanks for the $5. They say, love your videos, guys. One question. If SN10 and SN11 fail, would Elon be worried about the flip maneuver? Thanks, go to Mars. Or thanks, go Mars. I don't think so, but I'm not Elon. But my gut instinct at this point in the test program is that landing flip maneuver is just a matter of time before they nail it. In the same way that it took them a couple tries to nail Falcon 9 first stage landings, they'll stick the landing with the Starship eventually. Whether it's sooner or later, it's just a matter of time and refining out all of the little bugs that occur while they're trying to do something this complicated. And if you think about it, a Starship landing flip maneuver is significantly more dynamic and I'm just going to say more challenging, even though I have no bearing to say that. It's more challenging than a Falcon 9 landing. I mean, a Falcon 9 first stage is in the same orientation. It doesn't need to do any kind of crazy flip. It doesn't need to worry about propellant sloshing in the same way. It doesn't need to worry about the gyroscopic precession of the engines or something affecting the turbines as they rotate from 90 degrees. It's just, I don't know. I'm not a rocket scientist, but to me, that landing flip maneuver is basically a no, is not an issue at this point. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of getting those Raptors lit properly at the right point in time and space. So I don't think he would be worried. Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think the problem has ever been the flip maneuver. The problem has been either not pressurizing the methane header tank properly or getting the Raptors to reignite, both of which are things that would go wrong if they were trying to land vertically too. So I don't think the actual flip has been the problem so far. It's been getting those Raptors properly firing that has been the problem. But I think we also have another person on the call, somebody who is, as you can tell by their Twitter handle, is a massive fan of both the New York Yankees and the New York Giants. So welcome, Thomas.
What in the world did I just get introduced into? I mean, you got one of those right, but you won't mistake me for a Yankees fan. But how's it going, everybody?
Okay, I screwed that up. My bad. I was supposed.
Did you mean to say the Jets?
Yes. For some reason, I had in my mind that you were a Jets fan, which is even worse. So I screwed that up.
Well, I mean, the Yankees part is insulting enough, so you got the point across.
Shots fired.
One day I'll introduce Chris Bergen as a Leeds fan. That's the worst possible thing I could do.
So,
that's risk of being fired from NSF levels there.
The day I'm ready to quit, I'll just try that.
Yeah, and we've also got Chris B, notable Leeds fan and shuttle hater.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but I'm glad to join the stream because I've been waiting so long for something to happen in Boca Chica. It seemed like they never do anything down there. So finally, now that they're doing stuff, I'm happy to. I'm just kidding. It's been like a couple days since SN9. Oh man. But cryo test is what we're expecting today, right?
Yep, exactly. A cryo test, not a launch, to be clear, not a hop, not a flight, not even a static fire, although you never know, that's always a possibility, but we really don't think there's going to be static fire today, despite the residents having gotten that overpressure notice. It seems like more of a sort of a copy and paste sort of situation with that. But yeah, so cryo-proof test, we should see these tanks get fairly frosty if it follows the same sort of flow as for serial number 9's cryo test. So looks like we are sort of holding right now, and we're sort of expecting a lot more frost to accumulate, hopefully rapidly.
And I mean, the distinction of that, did we see the recondenser come online? Because we believe that would only be if they're fueling methane. So if we
Correct.
haven't seen that,
Correct, and there is no recondenser activity right now. And you can see even the flare stack is now venting gaseous nitrogen, and it's all
right?
frosty. You can see it right there in front
Yeah,
of those 3 vertical water tanks.
right. So those
Uh,
are all signs that this is a cryo test, not a static fire attempt.
yeah, exactly. And
Now,
the
how
window
long
is
is today's
long.
window? Yeah.
Thank you. You read my mind. I think it's what, till 6 p.m., Michael? Oh,
Hold
hang
on.
on.
Hold on. I will go to my
Camera.
trusty wenhub.com.
There you
It
go.
yeah, today till 6 p.m. local. So yeah, in theory they could do a cryo test and then detank all the nitrogen and stuff, and then fuel methane in there. And yeah, Mary confirmed 6 o'clock local too. Um, so yeah, in theory, I guess they could do a static fire like later today. Um, but obviously we'll have to look for sort of the normal visual signs of that.
Yep. We're not really expecting it, but it's always a possibility. Things in Boca Chica, as we like to say, are fluid and constantly changing. So yeah. Thomas,
Fluid
if
like
you
liquid nitrogen.
Oh
Sorry,
God.
I'll
I know
keep the
I
lane.
I
That's
I
my
I set that one up. That's like when I say something is cool during these cryo proof tests, and then
right. Yeah.
everybody is like, haha, cool. And I'm like, oh, darn it. But yeah, if you don't mind jumping in here, I'm going to step away for a minute and deal with some stuff on my end, and I will be back in a little bit.
You got it. Yeah, you got it, of course.
Thanks, buddy.
We got a. Yep, you got it. Thanks, Jack. I'll take over some super chats that have come through in the last couple minutes and some questions and stuff. Daniel with the super $20 super chat. Thank you so much. Just a cryo test. Yep, that's all we're expecting. And again, like we just kind of covered, we didn't see that recondenser come online, so it doesn't look like they're fueling methane. Thus, this is probably just a cryogenic proof test. Bob Brown with a super chat. Thank you so much. Georgie, hello, noob here. Why do we need the flip maneuver? Why do they do this? A very good question. So basically, the general premise is when you're doing a propulsive landing, you want to start that landing from as low velocity as possible, because that way you need to use less propellant to complete the final landing maneuver, the final landing burn. Falcon 9 accomplishes this by kind of sort of side slipping a little bit and increasing its drag ever so slightly, although it can only do that so much because it doesn't have the big aerodynamic surfaces that a Starship has. Starship is basically taking that to the extreme, since it can come down and land or start landing horizontally. It has much more drag in that configuration, and thus its terminal velocity is way slower. Therefore, when it does that flip maneuver back to the position where the engines are firing in the right direction, that is much more efficient because the Starship is traveling slower at that point, and thus you need less propellant, less fuel to complete the final landing maneuver. So it's all about fuel efficiency and needing less fuel for the landing burn.
It's interesting, Thomas, because
yeah.
before you joined, there was a really clear frost line from this camera angle right here, and as you can see right now, there is no clear frost line on this camera angle. If we go back to Mary's camera, you can still see a little bit of frost, but
Yeah.
definitely decreasing. We do see this happen during proof tests quite often, where the frost line kind of goes up and down and up and down, and then at the end it will finally rise up throughout most of the tank section. So we'll keep watching that. I wouldn't be too concerned about it, but just an observation is that frost line has gone down quite a bit.
Yep, we'll definitely keep an eye on it. But continuing on here, a couple new memberships. Taylor Davis, thank you so much. And Joe Benefield with a membership. Thanks for joining on. Appreciate it. Super chat question here. How will terminal velocity on Mars affect the maneuver? Very good question. So, yeah, on Earth, which is of course where we're seeing all these now, the atmosphere is much more dense than Martian atmosphere, and thus your terminal velocity from that sort of what we're calling that skydiving maneuver or the belly flop maneuver is much lower. On Mars, since the atmosphere is not as thick, that terminal velocity is way higher. Thus, the flip maneuver and beginning of the landing burn will have to happen much higher in the atmosphere than it does on Earth, because that terminal velocity will have to be higher, and you won't be able to passively slow down as much. You'll need that active landing burn to be a little longer than it does on Earth. So yeah, the maneuver will actually look less dramatic on Mars, just because it'll happen so much higher up. It won't be as close to the ground at that point. Very good question. But the same principle does apply. It does work the same way. It's just you can't take quite as much advantage of it. Let's see, got a super chat here from Kenneth asking me about something I'm not quite familiar with. Sounds like an on-orbit assembly demonstration. That is something that in theory could be supported by Starship vehicles, but I'm not familiar with that particular demonstration or anything, so I'll have to get back to you on that. And Go Fly with a super chat, thank you so much for your support, appreciate it. And then Johan with a super chat, love your show, thank you so much. Do you know if the fuel starvation issue from SN8 was actually corrected on SN9? Was this restart a new problem? So yeah, that fuel pressure problem on SN8, which likely resulted in fuel starvation, we have no reason to believe that wasn't corrected from SN8. In theory, SN9 didn't actually get that far, although we did see the first engine on SN9 start up successfully, so there was no apparent pressure problem. It looks much more like the SN9, the second Raptor engine itself failed, rather than a problem with the pressure system or anything like that. So yeah, this looks like it was a separate problem that will be addressed in a different way, not a sign of a continuing problem from the SN8 issue.
I think we might have another commentator on the line who is a fan of the world famous York City Football Club.
Thank you for
I thought you
saying.
were going to go for it all, Michael.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Michael, because I get back home from work and all I hear is Jack saying I'm a Leeds United fan. I thought, what?
We didn't know what happened was I introduced Thomas as a Yankees fan, which of course he's a Mets fan.
Ah, yeah.
So I joked if I said you were a Leeds fan, I would get fired. So I did not do that, but we were joking about possibly doing it.
Yeah, that's not even funny. It's just like, I'm going to turn this. I'm going to go and sulk in the corner of the room for the rest of the evening. But yeah, what an amazing view again. It's Starship SN10. I'm having trouble remembering which one to say when I'm tweeting, because you get into like auto mode where you start tweeting SN8, SN9, SN10 now. So yeah, it's interesting how fast they're turning this one around. If they get to the point of doing a static fire this week, I mean, even if they do it today, I still have that in the back of my mind, that notice Mary got last night, warning of the T-minus 10-minute siren. Again, we all think it's a cryo test today, but if Mary says siren, I think we all go, whoa, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
But of course, are we absolutely sure it's, because I'm just catching up myself, are we absolutely sure it's just liquid nitrogen right now?
Yeah, we haven't seen the recondenser come on, so they
Right,
can't be
there we
pumping
go then.
methane
So that's
right
a big
now.
clue.
So at this point, definitely a cryo test. But yeah, obviously they could. I mean, we were talking about they also have a long window, all the way till 6 p.m. local time. So in theory, they could complete a cryo test and then go into a static fire flow. That might be asking for a bit much, but it is Boca Chica. Weirder things have happened, so we can wait and see on that. But I think it's more likely that notice was just kind of a just in case the plans change again or something like that.
Yeah. The question I'd ask everyone who's listening and in chat as well, because I don't think we really know the answer to this, is how fast can you turn around a Starship from a cryo testing with liquid nitrogen into a static fire test with liquid methane and liquid oxygen? Do they have to really let it detank and depressurize for several hours? Or, I mean, can they do it the same day?
I don't think so. Question mark.
Yeah,
Yeah,
see,
if they had
why I
like
was
done
thinking,
this
yeah.
at like 8 in the morning, like at the very beginning of a window, I'd say maybe. But it's already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That seems too fast.
Yeah, and also I think the weather forecast after about Wednesday is quite dodgy, so there's no rush as far as, let's try and get everything done and try and launch by Wednesday, because I think that's what bites them in the tail when they rush. So yeah, I think it would be more sensible if they take the approach we think they're taking, which is to do the cryoproofing testing today, which gets that ticked off, that verifies the vehicle can take the pressure. Then they go into the static fire test campaign, knowing that the fact is it's very rare and shouldn't be assumed that one static fire test campaign day will finish up all that test objectives, where they get through the 3-engine firing, the results from the quick look data review, they call them, is passed as acceptable, and they then go to the FAA and say, okay, hi FAA, we're big pals now, aren't we? You're going to let us launch? And then hopefully go from there. So I think, I know Elon is quite driven in the way he wants this to be, which is a fully reusable, rapidly reusable launch vehicle. Rapidly is the key word there. They've got reusability sorted as far as Falcon 9 goes. They're getting the turnaround faster as well with Falcon 9. It's always that methodology of trying to increase the pace. And I think a lot of us have got, especially outside of the community, have got to understand what they're trying to achieve here. So that when we've seen these SN8 and SN9 lose it on landing, we've got to recognise they've got a lot of achievements in the bag already. We kind of, in fact, Elon did predict that he actually said in the tweet it could blow up off the pad with SN8. The fact that he got so close to a landing with SN8 has kind of set everyone's bars a little bit high. We've got to remember this is only going to be the third ever flight of a full stack Starship, and to achieve a landing on its legs on landing pad, noting that the last two both failed on the landing pad, so they got back over the right area, it's what something I always call calibrating expectations. It's something we've got to be careful not to get too carried away with and get too downhearted by the fact they've lost the previous two, because the previous two were lost just right at the end of their profiles. So we're getting closer and closer.
I like to think of Falcon 9 took three actual full-up landing attempts before it actually landed, so I'm hoping that trend continues for Starship and that SN10 is the first one to stick to landing. But that is optimistic.
Of course, I wrote an article last night about the changes Elon wants to implement, which will mitigate against what's happened with SN8 and SN9. First of all, SN9 mitigated what happened with SN8, which was the methane header tank failure, the pressurization failure, where it didn't help the landing burn at all and came down too fast, and obviously that's why it crashed. With SN9, it was one of the Raptors not relighting, and he's looking at the approach of using all three engines to relight them all three. If all three light, he'll deselect the one with the least lever arm, which is going to be the one which we've in the article. In fact, I'll link the article because there's a wonderful little diagram from Brendan, which Elon then replied with by saying yes. In other words, Brendan got it right. And I will put the article into chat right now. There we go. And you'll see about a quarter of the way down the article, I got a bit carried away to 1,500 words. A quarter of the way down the article, you'll see what we mean by the engine with least lever arm. If all three engines light up, he'll deselect that one. Or Starship will, not Elon himself. He's not pressing the buttons. Starship will deselect that engine and they'll land with the two good engines. If the other two engines, one of them has a failure, they'll utilise that third engine there, and then they've got the two engines for the flip. That will achieve the flip. And I do believe they'll still stick with one engine for landing, I do believe. But that is the way of mitigating that. And of course, with all these Starship vehicles at the production site and at the launch site, they can do this. They can lose a couple of vehicles and be ready to go again, as we're seeing right now. That's the crazy thing about this Boca Chica situation, is that they have so many Starships. If one fails, they've got another one down the road, ready to go. Or even next door on a pad, as the case was with SN9 and 10. So it's an incredible cadence that's allowing them these mistakes, I say very carefully, to understand the vehicle and get it right. It'll pay off in the long run, and in short order as well.
I know Elon said that, we were foolish not to, be doing that from the beginning. But of course, hindsight's 2020. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that a lot of us were
didn't like
talking
that.
about ahead of time, of like a big risk item. So.
I think that was just Elon in Twitter mode. I don't think it was foolish. I think it was a lesson learned, and there's nothing foolish about lessons being learned, especially with test vehicles and no crew on board, and no payloads on board. They're
you're not risking much of anything on these tests, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's see here. We got some more questions and stuff that we can go through, if that works for y'all.
It does, because it's supposed to be talking for 10 minutes about certain things. We'll get no questions.
Chris, you already linked the article. They'll read the article. It's okay.
There we go.
Let's see here. Georgie with a super chat question: do they need to start the landing maneuver earlier? I don't think that's the issue. What we were just talking about, the mitigation is, for at least for the SN9 issue, is starting all three Raptor engines. That way, if one of them fails, you can complete the maneuver using the other two, versus only starting two engines and risking that one of them doesn't work. You can't, on a moment's notice, light up the third engine as a backup. Raptor takes it takes a couple seconds to start up most rocket engines, so that wouldn't be able to react fast enough. But if you start all three and they're all working perfectly, then it's much easier to shut down the extra one, versus starting up two, hoping that they both work, and if they don't, then starting up a backup engine. It works better the other way. So that sounds like the mitigation they're doing. Yeah.
Just a quick entry to that. The other issue is that if all three engines do light up, they've got more thrust than they actually designed. They can't lower the throttle range down enough to have three engines run at the same time. So you'll have to deselect the one engine, the one with the least lever ramp, really, really, really fast. So if we watch SN10 landing flip in Achieve with three engines, you're going to see one of those engines literally flame out straight away because they'll have too much thrust. That's the amazing thing about this.
Exactly. Oh jeez. Alright, look what Michael's done. Here's $5 to tell Thomas that the Yanks are better than the Mets. I will hard disagree with you, Red Holly, but I begrudgingly have to acknowledge your super chat. Thank you for your support, and I'll take your money even though you're wrong. A super chat here from Paulus. Thank you so much. Go Fly with a new membership. Thanks for joining on. And here's a question from Jay asking about the SN9 investigation. First of all, great job, guys. Thank you. Only you can make a cryo test sound exciting. Appreciate it. We try our best. Any news about the FAA investigation? Chris, any word on that front? Of course, the FAA has to investigate SN9's anomaly just like they would any other. What do we know about that?
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of confusion over this FAA situation. A lot of mixed messages. A lot of wording being used to kind of like dilute how it's being done. I think the big take home is the FAA has got a job to do, and they do it. And as much as they may internally be thinking, we understand what this is a test program, there's no one around, it's all right, it's safe, no one's going to die. They have to take it seriously and be shown to be taking it seriously. At the same time, SpaceX knows what it's doing. It's not like they're not like a brand new company who have just basically set up a range in Boca Chica and said, "Oh, fair enough, we're going to launch some rockets." By the way, FAA, this is what we're going to do. They've got experience with them with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, so I get really iffy about how bad this FAA situation is. I think a lot of it is paperwork, a lot of it is posturing on the FAA side, and I think SpaceX are just far too experienced for them to be making the mistakes that the FAA came to intimate, shall we say. They've never said it, they just intimate it. And a lot of the media reports are picking up on what sources are saying. You've got to be so careful with sources that, that even if the source is genuine and is telling what they believe is true, they may have misheard certain things. And then it gets mistranslated. And then it becomes into a food fight in the media. So I just let's see what happens with SN10. If SN10 gets a launch date and there's no Elon tweets about the FAA holding things up, we know everything has been resolved. As far as SN9's situation, I'm sure they've investigated it. They've got to do it. That's their job. But it doesn't mean it's going to be held up for weeks and weeks on end while they keep looking over videos of the explosion and whatever the overpressure was like when it exploded. But we've seen videos on Twitter and stuff from people on the I don't know where it is, the amphitheatre area across from the water. And I've seen far bigger shockwaves come over than that. That was nothing in comparison, so I don't think that's a concern. I'll get too long-winded about this one again as well, so I'll be careful by saying, let's just wait and see what SN10's approval process is like.
Can I just really quickly jump in to say Spicy Thomas Fan Club?
What does that mean?
That means you were very spicy about the super chat with the teams, the sports balls teams. I don't know.
Well, yeah, because I just had to tweet that reports that I'm a Yankees fan are categorically false, because now it's showing up on my Twitter, too.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm all about Spicy Thomas. All right, bye.
One thing we'll add to the FAA discussion is that an investigation for an anomaly, whether it's a test flight or not, is standard FAA practice. The FAA does not have a choice. If there is an anomaly, the FAA has to investigate. So the fact that the FAA put out a statement saying that the SN9 anomaly is being investigated does not mean anything. If the test flight ends in an explosion, you can guarantee no matter what, FAA statement or not, as we see Starship vent for a second there, that there is going to be an FAA investigation. So the FAA investigation does not mean, SpaceX is never going to be allowed to test flight again. It just means that the FAA wants to understand what happened. So I don't think that's a big deal. I wouldn't read too much into it, and I don't expect the SN9 anomaly investigation to be something that holds up SN10 for an extended period of time. I think especially, that might be a depress, or it could be a sign that they're about to load. It's probably actually that they might be about to load because we do not see much frost yet. But
Maybe.
in any case, as I was saying, I think the bigger question for SN10 in terms of FAA approval will be the test flight itself. If SN10 is going to go to 10 kilometers, that's the same as SN9, so the FAA approval will be similar. If SN10 is going to go to 50 kilometers or somewhere else, that'll be an entirely different approval process because that changes all the glass analysis and whatnot. So I would look into more of, is SN10 going to do the same test flight in terms of FAA approval, not is SN9's anomaly going to be a problem, because I don't expect SN9's anomaly to be a problem personally.
Me neither, and I mean, especially if it is limited to a Raptor issue, which I think we're all hoping it is. Hopefully that's simpler to resolve and get approved for another test flight.
Yeah, quite clearly SN9 stayed well within its safety corridor.
Right, yeah, there was no issue like that.
Had SN9 come down on Boca Chica Beach or somewhere where it was not supposed to, then you could be expecting a much longer FAA anomaly investigation. But the fact that there is no evidence of any safety issues with SN9 seems to indicate that the FAA will probably not have too much of a problem with what happened.
Let's see, I'm going to bring on some more questions and super chats and things like that. Bill Schindler with a new membership, thank you so much. Here's a super chat question. Do you think Elon will send a test rocket to Mars before humans? I would say that almost certainly. In fact, I'm pretty sure he has confirmed this. Yes. Starship. The first time Starship lands on Mars, there will not be people on board. There'll likely be some cargo on board because it takes a lot of time and energy to get a mission to Mars. So it'd be a little, it would be the greatest if you could send it with nothing on board, even though it will be a test flight. But it'll be some cargo that will be okay if they lose.
Well, there's some Mars transfer windows coming up, and he's going to utilize that. I expect he wants, whether he'll achieve it or not, I don't know, but he wants to send a fleet of cargo vehicles to Mars, and at least have some staging of hardware there, ready in preparation for humans to then utilize it and start making it the initial part of the base, which will be a propellant farm and things like that. So, yeah, definitely.
I wonder. Yeah, that's a good question. How many uncrewed landings before a crewed landing? That could be a good question.
Lots and lots. I mean, this is, if he's going to try and do what he's envisioning, it's going to take a lot of upmass, and that's the whole thing he's getting around with the circling around the frequency he can launch, the amount of vehicles he can launch, and the amount of upmass with the refilling. Remember, it's not just the upmass; it's the refilling, the capability of Starship, and he wants to do that rapidly, and he wants to utilize the windows for transit time. So I would expect a fleet. How many? We don't know.
Sorry, Chris,
but
you're going to be interrupted quite rudely.
Sorry?
Because Mary just reported in our back channel that vehicles are returning to the pad. So what we just saw there was a depress vent. Sometimes we see venting like this doing a cryogenic proof test. It means they are loading propellant or loading liquid nitrogen rapidly, but in this case it appears that vehicles are returning to the pad, which means they are depressing, and I don't know for sure. It's always hard to say. Previously with cryogenic proof tests, we have seen more propellant in Starship, or more liquid nitrogen in Starship, but we did not really see much frost at all. So I'm not sure if this was aborted early, or if they're just doing a different type of test this time. But clearly you can see on your screen right now, vehicles have begun the process of returning to the pad. So I'm not sure if this is a failed proof test or not, but we definitely did not see a lot of frost. So it's either a different proof test where they pressurized it without putting much LN2 into tanks, or they aborted it early. We'll have to wait and see.
Definitely interesting. It was way shorter than other cryo tests that we've seen on Starship vehicles,
Yeah.
so I definitely suspect of a potential abort here. But
No.
so what signs are we going to be looking for? I guess if the road is reopened, that would mean they're actually done testing for the day. So I guess we're going to look for that.
Yes, and another important point is that we did not see any frosting on the methane tank. So, unclear if that is a major problem or not. But if I had to guess, I would obviously say this was an aborted test. However, I just want to be careful because sometimes things change in Starship, so I'm not going to rule out the possibility that it went as planned. But, I mean, obviously the most likely indication in this case is that they aborted.
Yeah, still venting a bit too.
Let's put out a tweet and see if Elon will reply.
Yeah.
I should do the at Elon thing, shouldn't I?
I'll keep bringing up some questions and stuff, trying
We do
to
have
keep up
more
with
news,
the-
by the way. 1 second.
Do we?
So
okay.
it looks like I'm just reading and making sure I have everything correct. Yes, I do. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, if I have my days of the week correct, and I think I do, now have temporary flight restrictions for the Starship SN10 launch. So when up, the answer is no earlier than Thursday. However, given that we just saw a likely aborted cryogenic proof test and we have not seen a static fire, I personally would not put too much weight into it, but technically speaking, SN10's hop is net no earlier than is what net stands for, so net Thursday at the earliest. Again, grain of salt.
A mountain of salt, I think, but I don't know. I mean, they do want to smooth out Starship operations. We'll see. But I think we're gonna have to focus on this cryo test first and whether it actually passed or if they just aborted it.
I mean,
if they did abort, obviously they have lots of time to redo it today, even so.
It's always a good sign when the flight TFRs come out, just as the cryogenic proof test appears to have been aborted. Although again, we don't know for sure, but does not seem like that was a successful proof test, which means they will have to do it again.
Alright, I'm gonna bring on some more questions and things here while we wait to see what's going on with today's testing. Super chat here from Scott. If there was ever a starship that could both land on the moon and return to Earth with no propellant refill, could the header tanks be refilled from the main... Oh, I see what you mean. So if you're not going to do on-orbit refueling, but you use the header tank propellant for a landing, and then you want to land somewhere else, can the header tanks be refilled? I would guess yes. I'm pretty sure that the fueling connections on... So they fuel Starship currently through the bottom of the vehicle, through like the thrust skirt. There's piping connections down there. And that should be just kind of one connection. So clearly propellant... Well, I guess I can't assume that, because it could be just split between the main tanks and the header tanks there. If I had to guess, a Starship should be able to handle multiple landings without a refueling in between. So therefore there should be some plumbing to allow main tank to header tank propellant transfer. I guess we don't know an official answer on that, but I would be surprised if they couldn't. I'll just put it that way. Question here: why don't they try to land Starship in the water first, like they did with Falcon 9? Is it unlikely it would survive? It would flow pretty well. Well, they don't really have water-based landing facilities to attempt yet. They're working on converting those oil rigs for some Starship operations, but they're not ready yet. And the drone ships are reserved for operational Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy missions. You're not going to risk really risky landings on those vehicles and potentially destroy them when they're needed to support operational missions. So they don't really have a lot of options to keep a Starship dry should it land successfully out over the water. So their option then is, do you do a soft water landing but then admit that even if it splashes down in the water, you're likely not going to be able to refly it or get a lot of inspections out of it, because it's going to get soaked in ocean water immediately, or do you try to land it on land? And they went with the land option just because even landing it on the landing pad, we've seen they've had 2 crash landings. Neither of them have put any damage on the surrounding infrastructure. Concrete pad is relatively easy to be repaired. So I think the smarter decision is the one they went with it, which is attempting landing on a landing pad that's, you know, removed enough from the rest of the ground infrastructure that it's not actually that big a risk.
And I agree with that. I was going to mention that the first Falcon 9 landings, which were water landings, were very much to test the landing technique of Falcon 9. They've got that sus, and you can prove that by seeing how close SN8 and SN9 got to the landing pad. In fact, over the landing pads, they have got the approach sorted, and that was the main thing for the water landings with Falcon 9. And now it's just that landing bird. So yeah.
And we're working on figuring out what the status of the approved test is right now. If the roadblock goes down, that would be an indication that they're done for today. But Mary is saying that the roadblock has stayed up, so most likely they just aborted the test and are looking to make another attempt, given that the road is still closed. But we'll keep you all up to date. As of now, we're going to move our timeline back to the road closed status, as it appears they may be recycling this test.
Completely agree. Yeah, we'll stay tuned for more information or signs that anything might be different, but I think most likely is definitely a recycle, as teams are currently at the pad working some sort of issue, likely. Got a question here from Phoebe asking, how is Raptor development going? With Starships, we got SN15 with improvements. Is it the same with Raptors, or is every new Raptor better? Chris, what is your take on the status of Raptor? I mean, we saw SN9 appear to have its in-flight failure due to a Raptor issue, so clearly still working out some issues in that program.
I think the Raptors are now set in kind of design, but there will be tweaks as they go along, just naturally as engines are. But we've seen there's some evidence of what the Raptor performance is like in Elon and SpaceX's eyes by the fact that SN39 is going with SN10, and that's one of the earlier iterations. It was literally going to fly with SN8, but it was pulled. They've repaired whatever was wrong with it, or if there was something wrong with it, I don't know. It was put back into SN10 now, so it's not like they've gone with all the SN50 range with SN10, as if SN50 onwards were like a new version of Raptor where they'd improved something. So that gives me confidence in how Raptor's performing on a test stand and how they're confident with the engine itself. I think the issue is the reignition, just for that part of because remember 3 out of the 4 engines have now relighted on that flip. So it's not like a fluid dynamics issue, it's not like a Raptor issue, it's probably just an igniter somewhere. It's just one of them things of learning about and getting right and understanding in the environment it's in with the flip that this is what they need from the igniter during the flip maneuver to get before the flip maneuver to get the relight, because it's coming down in the belly flop during that relight, which is different to being on a test stand or on a horizontal vertical test stand in McGregor. It's a whole different kettle of fish. They've got to learn from this. And as far as the future Raptors go, we've seen from Gary Blair's flyover pictures, they're well into the SN50s now, and they're looking to build what looks like a new test stand for Raptor to really speed up the amount of Raptors they can push through McGregor during testing, ready in preparation for the amount of engines they'll need for future Starships, and especially Super Heavy. When Super Heavy needs 28 engines, they're going to need to be piling through those Raptors in McGregor at a rate of several a day almost. They will need that capability, but as far as the design goes, I think they're happy with it, barring future tweaks.
We are seeing cars leave the pad again, so perhaps we may be about to see another attempt, and that was a quick fix. Whatever the problem was, I will let our car counters in our membership Discord tell me if those are all the cars we saw go to the pad return, but it looks like that final car has the flashing lights, which means it should be the pad clear vehicle. So I think we should be good for another attempt at the proof test.
That's a
Makes
good
you
sign.
wonder what they
Hopefully just
actually
a
do
minor.
when the cars
Yeah.
go to the pad. Do they just take a hammer down there and just like there's some tank which has not got a valve stuck somewhere and just go whack and then back
Yeah,
out
and
again?
then just leave.
Yeah.
Well, percussive maintenance never hurt anybody.
Yeah.
Got a new membership here from Niels. Thank you so much for joining on. Let's see here. Oh, here's a good question from David saying, when it flies a real mission, do you think the fuel tanks could be smaller because it doesn't need launch fuel, seeing that it's going to launch on super heavy, more space for passengers or freight? Keep in mind, I believe the tanks that we're seeing on SN9, SN8, SN10 are the real size propellant tanks. And the reason for that is these vehicles are, of course, only doing low altitude flights, so they don't need a lot of fuel. In fact, they only partially fill the fuel tanks, excuse me. But on operational missions, yes, you'll be taking advantage of the super heavy booster, which will get you a fair bit of the way towards space. However, you still need propellant to finish orbital insertion. And then, depending on where the mission goes, you need more propellant to get there. So if you're going to a higher orbit, if you're going to the moon or Mars, all of those require propellant. And then, of course, it needs to land somewhere at some point and then potentially fly back, depending on what kind of mission profile you're looking at. So no, the fuel tanks that you're seeing on these vehicles are the real size fuel tanks. But keep in mind that those fuel tanks only go about halfway up the vehicle that you're seeing. The top half of the vehicle or so is actually an empty nose cone. That's where all the payload would go, whether that's passengers or cargo. So there's plenty of space for that and plenty of space for all the fuel that Starship needs. Let's see here. Gonna keep going with some more questions and super chats and things here. Here's a good one from Quark Quinn asking, has it been determined that the Raptor that did not ignite properly was or wasn't the Raptor they did not replace after the 3 static fires? Do we know which engine failed, Chris?
No, we don't know. I think somebody could speculate which engine number it was, and then we could probably look back to the installation. But the way the installation works, it's very hard to work out which one's which, and in flight. So I wouldn't like to speculate which one it was, and if there was any relation to that swap out. So yeah, I'd be careful to try and trace back its history and try and point shame at that engine. But again, is it the engine? The igniter is part of the engine, yeah, sure, but it's a minor thing. It's not like the engine ate itself and basically threw out chunks of itself. We did see some liberation of debris and whatever, but we don't know if that was from the engine itself. It's very hard and I should say it's very easy to speculate, what the issue was, but we've not had any official comment from Elon. Just that we were dumb thing, So that's the only thing he said about the actual failure issue itself with that engine. But from SpaceX's own words, on their very rare updates on their website, they did actually say did not relight. So that's a big key thing there. That's definitely got to be igniter related as far as I'm concerned.
Right. But yeah, so unfortunately cannot speculate as to, well, I mean, we could speculate, but it would be useless as far as which actual engine it was. Maybe some people who can go back at the footage might have a guess, but we do not know if we had that, so that has not been determined, to answer your question. Super chat here from Jamie. Is it possible for a stripped down super heavy booster to reach orbit? What's with the fascination of single stage to orbit of Starship vehicles? It's not gonna happen. I'm sorry, chat. I promise you it's just not gonna happen, ever. Is it possible? I have no idea. I don't think I can.
I care because I'm a big fan of the X-33 Venture Star, which was a wonderful SSTO, which undeservedly...
Was it, though? Because it didn't fly, so...
No, I know, it was way before its time. It was just before its time. I asked Tory Bruner, who worked on it, could it be done with today's manufacturing technology? He said yes. So it was just before its time.
I don't even think it was before its time. I think it was of its time. It just didn't get a good enough chance from Congress and funding. They solved the issue with that main composite tank. That was a solved problem.
Yeah.
Before the program was canceled, and it got canceled anyways. So I'm a huge X-33 fan, but sorry for the SSTO stuff, Thomas.
Oh, I just muted myself. But no, it's fine. It's just, I mean, if you look at the Starship architecture as it is now, it's two stages that are both fully reusable. That accomplishes the same thing you're trying to accomplish with SSTO. It's relatively simple, and yeah, it's two stages instead of one, but it's still fully reusable. So it's not that big. Like, it wouldn't be a huge improvement to the architecture if it was somehow an SSTO system. That wouldn't get you that much better performance or outcomes of the program. So there's like no reason to be upset that it's not an SSTO, I guess is my point. To answer your question, it might be, but it doesn't really matter. Let's see here. Matlan, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but I tried. Could we see robots building a kind of prepared infrastructure before the first humans arrive? I'm assuming this is talking about Mars. And almost certainly, yes, there will be lots of uncrewed missions with the various pieces of cargo, and you will need some sort of robotic interface to sort of begin deploying those kind of things. Don't know what that might look like, but I think it is safe to say, or it would be a good guess, that there would be some sort of robotic system that can deploy certain systems and start preparing fuel production infrastructure and habitat infrastructure and things like that prior to the first crewed missions.
Can I just add that I heard, I don't know if it's ever confirmed or if it was even true, that during the NEMO tests with NASA, where they simulated the asteroid missions, which are no longer the case, they looked in what's called telerobotics, which is where they control robots with the time delay via relay from an orbiting spacecraft around Mars. And they did it on the Mars missions rather than just the asteroid missions during its NEMO test. And the word was SpaceX was taking a great interest in how the telerobotics, the delay, and controlling robots on the surface would work. So maybe there's some pre-planning of utilizing the cargo that was landing on Mars via Starship's initial cargo missions via telerobotics with robots on the surface. So that was an interesting little thing which peeked back into my memory there.
We did see, by the way, Starship venting a little bit a couple seconds ago. Could be, I think that's just a sign that they're starting loading, right, Michael?
Perhaps, or maybe just venting out some pressure from the previous test, but we'll keep an eye on the tank farm, we'll keep an eye on the base of Starship for any vapors, and we'll keep an eye on Starship's vents itself, and hopefully it will not be long until we see the next attempt.
Continuing on, we got a question here from Paul asking about Mars launch windows. How many are there a year? So a Mars transfer window, the time when a spacecraft can efficiently transfer from Earth's orbit to Mars, is every 26 months, so just almost not quite every 2 years. However, that's not the same thing as a launch window. You could launch several spacecraft in one transfer window. In fact, the transfer window usually lasts a couple weeks. It depends on the exact vehicle and how efficient it is, and how much of an inefficient trajectory it can make. Sometimes it could last a month or so. But so in that time, you can launch as many vehicles as you want, and they can all transfer to Mars in that same window. So there's technically not a limit as to how many you can send in a year, just as long as it's during a transfer window. But in between transfer windows is about every 26 months or so.
And we literally saw that with all these spacecraft that were launched at the same time, now arriving at the same time at Mars.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, coming very, very soon. I think the next article is in work.
Yes, starting tomorrow, the Al Amal probe from the United Arab Emirates arrives, and then the next day, the Chinese Tianwen-1 spacecraft, and then on February 18th, Perseverance will make its landing attempt. So yeah, and they all kind of launched within the same week or so of one another, and then they're all arriving at the same time in that same order, because that's how physics works. Yes. So let's see here. There's a question from Kevin. Has anyone talked about how much payload Starship could return to Earth from a future space industry? I donate when Chris B is on stream. Well, there you go, Chris. How much payload could it return? I believe its return payload is the same as its upmass payload, so about 100 tons-ish. I don't know if that's accurate, though. It might not be, because the landing thrust-to-weight ratio might need to be higher, so maybe it's less. Granted, 100 tons is a lot, so that might not be necessary. I love
the idea of down mass, by the way, Thomas. I love the idea of down mass. I think that's one of the crowning achievements of what SpaceX has done with its cargo dragon, whereas Cygnus is a return to a destructive deorbit burn, where it is literally destroyed as its end of mission. Cargo Dragon brought it back down, splashed down, allowed for the time-sensitive experiments to be offloaded straight away at Port Los Angeles, as it initially was, and then the rest was brought back to McGregor and taken back. Down mass is critical. It was lost after shuttle. They haven't got anything close to down mass of shuttle yet, but they will with Starship. So it's getting very interesting to me of what Starship can do, not just launching, but returning.
How will the downmass capability of Dream Chaser compare? Because obviously it's a much smaller vehicle, but there's no crew on board. So is the cargo complement comparable?
It's not massive. It's a very small pressurized area, which is what they'll be utilizing for what we're talking about for ISS downmass of interest. So it won't be a lot. It will be nothing close to shuttle, obviously. It's going to be useful though, and it's even better if you think about it, because it will return to a runway. You can literally offload it straight away within an hour or so. So, you know, after safing, compared to recovering the vehicle like Cargo Dragon from the water and put it onto the ship and then taking off the time-sensitive experiments. So the CRS-2 Cargo Dream Chaser is going to be a real game changer as far as fast turnaround of the critical ISS downmass. Amount of downmass is going to be less, but it's that critical experiments in the glaciers, the refrigerators, they need to get off straight away. That'll be really useful with Cargo Dream Chaser.
Continuing on here, got some super chat here from Philip saying funding for the Jackmobile to go to Boca. I know Jack is saying to himself, the launch date's no earlier than. The launch date's no earlier than. Doesn't want to get stuck in Boca again. But appreciate the support. Got a super chat here asking first in-orbit refueling when? So when could we see a potential in-orbit refueling test? Chris, do you think that might be a goal of the first orbital Starship launch, or is it going to be some flight after that?
My gut feeling when you read the question out was that's going to be one of the last things they're going to try and achieve, because it is so hard. It is critical to them though. They have to do it. They have to make it work. It's literally part of the architecture. I really think we can easily get carried away. We're talking about Mars bases and what have you. First of all, they've got to achieve this landing. Then they've got to achieve orbital. They've got to check out the TPS. They've got to check out everything works on that. They've got to check out the controllability of these different regimes. Returning from 10 kilometers or 12.5 kilometers is a lot different, as anyone's going to say Captain Obvious here, than returning from orbit. The re-entry is going to be key, how it performs during re-entry. Then, after they've done several orbital missions, and I assume with like Starlinks maybe as the first utilization of those orbital missions, because it's their payload, so if it lost, it's not great, but it's not, you know, a big thing for a customer. They'll get as many Starlink launches done as possible to shake out the system, and then they will try the refilling technology, which is going to be, you know, I'm sure they've got it in simulations, everything like that. They've done everything they can on paper and on computer, but in reality, maybe next year. And I say next year as kind of like, oh, we've got to wait a bit longer. That's incredible to think that they could get that close if they go for it next year. If they go orbital this year and do enough launches to be confident in the system and then do refilling next year, that's huge. That'd be amazing. So that's what I'm thinking. I think that's the last step, really, in their initial test program.
It's interesting because since it's so critical to the success of the system overall, I feel like they'll want to start testing it even as soon as they can. Because, I mean, the sooner you can make any changes to make sure that system works, the faster you get to an actual operational vehicle that can conduct the missions that it was designed to do. But I think those early orbital missions, maybe not the first one, but once they're like putting Starlinks on board, you could deploy Starlinks and then keep the spacecraft on orbit and conduct an on-orbit refueling test. You could do both on the same flight. So I wonder if we'll see something like that. I would think within the first 10 flights or so, at least one of them will attempt an on-orbit refueling demonstration. Maybe even like the first 5. Because like you said, it's so critical to get that right. So
can I just say how crazy that would be though? Because
I'm not saying it wouldn't be crazy, but
no, crazy in a good way.
Yeah.
The fact that they could get, we look back on Mary's first videos and pictures of what Boca Chica was. It was a tent. It was a tent and literally a hopper as a water tower because it's just like this mold, this concrete mold they're making hopper with. That was a few years ago. That was literally a few years ago. I always preface this by saying I'm not against SLS as a vehicle. I think SLS as a vehicle is great, but that isn't going to launch until about February, March next year at this rate. Now, I know they're going to try and do everything they can to launch this year, but right now, everybody who I know involved with SLS says February or March is the current no earlier date, date. And I think if there's a chance SpaceX could be orbital and even trying to refill by then, that would be crazy because SLS is a more powerful rocket as far as pure power goes, but it loses it when it doesn't do refilling. The refilling is what gives Starship the extra boost of the capability. And, we said to Shelby, I don't do politics by the way, we said to Shelby stepping down, it's going to get really interesting next year if Starship is proving her worth while SLS is doing her first launch and then standing down for a few years before the next launch, which is what the case will be. That 2-year gap between Artemis 1 and Artemis 2, 2 years being what it is right now, it might be longer, is where Starship could really, shoulder barge away into this. And, hopefully, I want to see both vehicles launching. I really do. And I think there's a real nice roadmap possibility there where Starship does cargo and SLS does just crew. I know they're thinking about that. But if SLS doesn't really buck up her, her act and prove her worth as far as a vehicle that can keep some kind of schedule, then Starship is going to be stood there like a big silver marker saying, look at me. And with no Senator Shelby to argue in Congress and Senate or wherever he is and say, oh, but SLS is Alabama and I like Alabama, then, I think there's a real chance that Starship could be the super heavy lift launch vehicle of choice for the United States.
It will definitely be interesting, and that honor refueling is probably, like you said, that big thing. And they have a partnership with NASA to work on demonstrating that, so it's going to happen at some point, and when it does, that'll definitely be sort of a turning point as far as will Starship be successful or not. So hopefully we'll start to see them attempt that sooner rather than later.
Michael should be interrupting me by now because it's actually venting. We can see venting now. So
yeah,
it's been venting for a little
past 10 minutes.
Oh, Michael, you're very kind not to say, Chris, shut up. Venting.
We'll keep an eye. I think the big thing we'll be looking for is for our frost line to start appearing, because then we know they're actually loading things. But
no vapors in the aft skirt right now. Once we see vapors in the aft skirt, that would be an indication that some cold stuff is being put into Starship. But I will actually check the. Oh yeah, there are. Look at that.
Oh yeah, there you go. Right on cue.
We'll move up to LN2 loading. LN2 is liquid nitrogen, if you are not familiar with that, but they're using an inert liquid, which is nitrogen in this case, rather than the normal liquid oxygen and methane propellants in order to reduce the risk for the cryogenic proof test, because nitrogen is inert, so if something goes wrong, it is not as big of a deal as if you were to have a potential for a fireball with that oxidizer and fuel. So SpaceX just going with an inert nitrogen liquid for today's test.
And also, it should be pointed out that doesn't necessarily mean like a massive overpressure event where the thing pops and nitrogen goes everywhere. It could also simply be a very small leak, which is the purpose of these proof tests, is to make sure there's no leaks. If there's a very small leak, if you're leaking methane or pure oxygen, that can be a fire risk. If you're leaking nitrogen, nothing happens. You end the test, you go back to the pad, you fix the leak, and then you do it again. So it's also not just a matter of, oh, if it explodes, it will do less damage because it's not a fireball, it's just a pop. It's actually probably more likely to be, oh, if a leak is there, it's much easier to fix it because there's no risk of that leaking substance to start a fire. And do things like that. So, but yeah, liquid nitrogen loading based on the vapors at the bottom of the vehicle, so they're back into another cryoproof attempt here.
You have a lot of super chats if Thomas.
Yep, I'm getting right back into that right now. In fact, the very first question I'm going to ask someone named Thomas is asking, have you noticed that the TPS tiles, the thermal protection system tiles, on the aft flap are on the wrong side, the wayward side, I believe it's called. I think, well, there's the wind-facing side and the leeward side, I think is the other side. I actually haven't seen photos of tiles on the actual flap. Are there? And if they are they on like the side we weren't expecting them to be?
Yes, so there are tiles on the wrong side of the aft flap, the leftmost aft flap, as we see frost forming again, so that's a good sign.
Oh, yep.
Or at least condensation, but I have a feeling that's about to be frost. But yes, there are tiles on the other side, so we're not sure if that's just for testing the adhesive to make sure those tiles are properly staying on Starship's flaps, or if perhaps we will see some of the, like on shuttle, how you had that thermal protection system kind of wrap around the outsides of the wings. You might see that on Starship's flaps, but these tiles are more towards the center. So if I had to guess, they are probably just testing the adhesive. I'm not sure that's an indication of the final position, but that is definitely frost forming on SN10 right now.
Yeah.
Just speaking about TPS for a second, because it's one of my
Yep.
fun things. The evolution of TPS testing on Starship is interesting, because that's another test objective that we don't talk about too much, especially during, as far as Elon doesn't speak too much about it. It's something where we've seen extra patches being put on. SN11's patch of TPS is quite huge. I mentioned the article I wrote as using one of Mary's photographs, because Mary gets great photographs every single time. I mean, I could do these articles basically. It's 1,500 words, but I use about 10 images because there's just so many brilliant visuals. I'll put it into chat again there. We can see a real large patch of TPS. And again, as Michael said, they're testing the adhesive. They're obviously not getting any close to kind of re-entry temperatures because they're not getting that high. But they're testing how it performs in the aerodynamic regime, because you don't want your tiles falling off. Any shuttle fan will know that. It's something that I think they're getting close to having a technique where they could have a fully TPS'd windward side of a Starship by, SN18, maybe, something like that. Especially for orbital attempts, so we know they're getting close to an orbital attempt when they do that. So that's something to keep an eye on. They're definitely evolving how much TPS they put on these vehicles.
Yeah, I think the SN18 is a decent sort of estimate for an orbital vehicle, and of course by then they'll need the full heat shield.
Yep.
It's possible that they actually want to test that beforehand, though, so like some suborbital or high atmospheric flight could have a full heat shield complement. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Something to keep an eye on. Each prototype does have more and more tiles on them, so they're clearly progressing there. Okay, let's see here. Christopher with the super chat: is it possible to rotate vertical earlier in the landing maneuver and then switch to the main propellant tanks for landing? I'm guessing the mains have more fuel than the headers at that point. I don't know if that's something I mean, the fact that they have dedicated those header tanks for the landing propellant, I think indicates that they have enough fuel in those tanks to complete the landing burn. And again, I don't think that would address the issues they're having. The first issue was a pressurization issue, which they appear to have fixed. And the second issue on SN9 was an actual Raptor engine issue, it looks like. So nothing to do with the fuel levels or anything like that. So I'm not sure that's a solution to any problem they're actually facing.
And if I can interrupt you again, Thomas, I'm sorry about this. Every time I interrupt
You're good.
you, we've got a new article on site. I'm going to just link the tweet, which you can all tweet out as well yourselves. It's from Chris G. It's an article about Maven. So we are talking another topic because it's about Mars. So
Right.
It's related. So I will put that into chat.
And this actually connects to this next question. It says, greetings from Scotland. Thank you so much. Are there any plans to use air mining and the Sabatier reaction to source propellant in situ at the Boca Chica launch facility? So talking about in situ resource utilization, which is a big part of Mars exploration, basically producing fuel and other commodities via resources on Mars. Is it possible they could do that at Boca Chica? I do not know if they are doing that at Boca Chica. I don't know if we've heard any rumors of that. They will have to do that on Mars at some point, and Elon has said that since they're already developing the technology anyway, eventually Starship launches from Earth will also become carbon neutral. In that sense, they will be capturing carbon from the air and using that to produce their propellants, their liquid methane. So It's possible that that happens at Boca Chica eventually, yes. In fact, I would guess that it would happen. I just don't think we have any firm plans for that in the very, very near term yet, because I think they're still working on that development. Interestingly, that does connect to the article we were just talking about, because as the Mars fleet arrives in the next couple days and week, the Perseverance rover actually carries a MOXIE demonstrator, which is the process of creating oxygen. And actually, I don't know if it creates water as well. I gotta remember, but it is a sort of in situ research utilization demonstration on Mars on the Perseverance rover, which is landing on the 18th. So, interestingly, there are already some demonstrations of that coming up on Mars, and yeah, that technology should eventually also be used here on Earth. A question here asking what are the dimensions of SN10? So it's the same dimensions as SN8 and SN9, same exact size. What is the? I know the diameter is 9 meters. What's the height of just the Starship portion? Is it 50 meters?
Yep, about 50.
Okay, so 50 meters tall, 9 meters diameter. I don't know if there are like more detailed specifications about like how tall the nose cone specifically is and stuff like that. That might exist elsewhere on the internet as well, but generally speaking, 9-meter diameter. Let's see here. You got a super chat here saying, thank you for the coverage and helping to inspire my 4-year-old son with the really big rockets. Thankful for all of you
That's
helping
nice.
us witness history. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind words, and you're glad your son is being inspired as well. Super chat here from Matt. Thank you so much. Jamie asking, won't they need the Super Heavy booster for return flights from the Mars service? No. So Starship can single stage to orbit and in fact return all the way to Earth from the Martian surface. That's because Mars' gravity is much lower and the atmosphere is much thinner, so much less atmospheric drag. The Super Heavy booster will only be needed to lift off from Earth's surface. All other interplanetary destinations for the Starship vehicle will not need a booster. And Michael, is this video feed frozen? I think that feed you just switched
like
from.
it.
Yeah, so we'll work on
Okay.
that. But we have
I missed
other
that.
camera
I'm blind.
views. Luckily, the robot army will have us covered. Let's see, more questions here. Chris with a super chat, what would you speculate the cost that SpaceX has tied up in each vehicle like SN8, 9, and 10? Raptors alone are at least $1 million each, or MM? I don't know if that means $1 million or something else. Do we have any speculation as to the cost of each of these vehicles, Chris?
No, we don't, but we do know that there's a lot of money being invested in Boca Chica itself, the actual facilities. We just don't know how that pans out as far as the vehicle cost. I think what we can say is the vehicle cost is coming down all the time because the amount they're putting out. They've got the manufacturing hardware there now, they've just got the steel coming in. So they're literally buying steel and putting it through the process. And I think there's just a question now of seeing how many they can do in succession so they bring the price point down before they start selling the vehicle for operational vehicles, operational missions for paying customers, be it especially starting with payloads. I do think it's infinitely cheaper than anything else in its scale. That goes without saying. So I think whatever the price comes out as internally to SpaceX per vehicle, it will be extremely economically viable.
Thank you. And then some more questions here. How many starships do you think they will have to send to Mars before they have sufficient refuel infrastructure to start to send them back? In theory, I would think you could fit all the equipment you need for propellant transfer in a single Starship, especially if that was the only payload on board the vehicle. So in theory, if the first Starship that successfully lands on Mars is carrying the propellant production infrastructure and is able to deploy it successfully, that very Starship could be refueled and be able to fly back to Earth. Of course, we don't really know exactly what that system will look like from SpaceX, so we might have to wait and see for a little bit, but it very well could be that a single Starship mission can carry the entire infrastructure for refueling, at least for that one Starship. So I don't know if we're going to have to send a whole fleet to kind of build this massive infrastructure, or if they can at least start with a smaller bit of equipment that can support it immediately.
And we do see the frost rising now on the liquid oxygen tank and frost forming on the upper methane tank.
Yep.
So I think maybe we can finally move up to the frost increasing status for the first time today. It's always hard to know for sure with a proof test, but
Yeah, I
it
think
does
you're
seem
definitely right.
we're getting farther than we have before.
And again, we'll expect to see those tanks pretty much completely frost over once they are into frost holding, or once they're actually at the height of the cryo test. Got a super chat here from Austin, sarcastically asking, when is this rocket gonna fly? Just kidding, love you guys, appreciate it. Although we can actually report that flight restrictions indicate, in theory, they could launch as early as Thursday. Seems very optimistic, but we'll have to wait and see. But thank you for the support. Quark with a new membership, thanks for joining on, appreciate it. And Boone saying, is NASASpaceflight having a Mars landing stream? And thanks for all the hard work on these streams. If you're talking about the Perseverance stream, I don't know. I don't know if we'll have any sort of like clean video feeds to share for that. If we do, fair chance we have a stream, but you have to stay tuned. What we know for sure is that NASA TV will have coverage. So regardless, there will be a live stream, whether it's from us or otherwise. Alexander with a super chat. Is the steel from SN10 recycled for future starships? We know. I don't know. Have we seen any starship repurposed from the old vehicles?
No, they send it off to scrappers. It's literally we
Okay.
saw with the nurse come for SN8, the guy with the digger who spent about 3 hours trying to flatten it enough to get into the back of the truck. The truck was a contractor, a recycling contractor, where it wasn't for Starship. It was just recycling for whatever company does that. So they're not reused.
Gotcha. And then a question here from Bryant. How do you think they will handle super heavy tests? Do you think they will be like Grasshopper, powered up and down, or powered and free fall tests? Will they wait until they land a Starship? So I think the first booster test, I mean, from what Elon has said, he mentioned 150 meter hop tests, right? So we're looking at things similar to Starhopper, SN5, and SN6. So the Raptor engines don't, there's no in-flight relight for the Super Heavy booster or anything like that on those initial tests. And so of a straight up, straight down with a small translation over to the landing pad kind of test. I think that's what we're expecting at first. Not sure if they'll do anything beyond that afterwards, as far as like higher altitude flights or in-flight relights of the Raptors, or if they'll then kind of conduct those tests as part of orbital launch attempts, which is kind of how they did it on Falcon 9. The Falcon 9 would conduct a regular mission, and then once stage separation occurs, then the first stage kind of becomes a test flight and attempts a landing. They can do that with Super Heavy and Starship as well. They can launch actual Starship missions. So to that end, they will also probably not have to wait to land a Starship first. I think they can be testing both of those things sort of simultaneously.
And I think the point to make about the 150 meter hop of a Super Heavy booster, which would be crazy. I mean, imagine the difference between a hopper and a Super Heavy booster doing that same 150 meter hop. It'd be quite hilarious. Is that when Elon said that, it was before SN8's launch. And I think with SN8 and SN9's achievements so far, let's face it, they're achievements, even though they both failed in landing, it might have evolved since. And the other evidence of the evolving path is the fact that there's 4 vent holes, potential of 4 Raptors on BN1. Again, we don't know what BN1's flight is, but with BN2 already being out in the wilds, shall we say, spotted by Mary at the production site, they may go higher with the first launch of Super Heavy.
Gotcha. And Matthew with a new membership, thanks for the support. And Boom with a super chat. Let's just take a second to think. In 5 or more years, we'll be watching a Starship land knowing it's been on the surface of Mars. That will be crazy. I'm interested by your 5+ years estimate, because in theory, there's a Mars transfer window next year and one in 2024. Let's be a little pessimistic and say they don't launch one in next year, so they launch in 2024. Could stay there the minimum amount of time, which is just a few months, and then have a transfer window back. Would probably be a landing in oh geez, hold on, I'm gonna look it up. Because in theory, actually, that 5 year thing, that 5 year estimate might be correct. I'm pulling up. There's this excellent resource called the Cosmic Train Schedule. It's just a interplanetary transfer window calculator. And so, departing from Mars to Earth, and we're looking at the launch window in 2024, so probably lands 2025. And so, oh wait, no, hold on, I did that backwards. I gotta do Earth to Mars first. So the Earth to Mars window opens. There's one in 2022 and one in 2020. So if they launch late 2024, they'll land in about June of 2025. So the next return window after that is in September of 2026, landing in 2027. So, in theory, the first Starship landing on Earth after returning from Mars would be like May 2027, which is 6 years. So that 5+ years estimate could be correct, unless they're ready to send a prototype to Mars next year's transfer window, because then you're talking about maybe arriving in 2025, and then you're talking about 4 years from now. So I don't know. Is there any chance that a Starship launches to Mars during the 2022 transfer window?
I don't know, but I will say we can get fixated on Mars, and rightly so. But Starship is also vying for the HLS, so there's a very good chance that during this interim period, before they do the Mars missions, if it is that later window, that there could be Starships landing on Mars, setting up the first moon, the first lunar base. And to me, that's very exciting. The argument we've been to the moon before is not really applicable in this sense, because what we've done before with Apollo was literally landing on the moon, doing some flag planting, bouncing around, taking some rocks, maybe in a lunar rover. This is completely different. This is a new ball game. This is basically to set up a permanent base on the moon, and that is a stepping stone. It always has been a stepping stone to Mars. So this interim period between when we can start setting up a Mars base is all about the moon. And I think that interim years will shake out Starship for its beyond Earth orbit shakedown, to make it operational for deep space missions, to make the Mars missions more achievable, that when they do send its fleet to Mars, they've got a lot of background, a lot of history with the vehicle. So I'm more looking forward towards the next steps rather than the future big goal. And of course, after Mars, they've got even bigger goals of landing on moons further out in the solar system. So there's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, and of course, they're not hindered on moon missions by those big transfer windows, because you can launch to the moon kind of whenever you want. So it just depends on when is the landing site in daylight, if that's a requirement. Of course, they could land on the dark side as well. So that's another thing. They don't have to wait for transfer windows. They can launch to the moon whenever. So those missions can kind of come in between the Mars windows. That's a good point. And let's see here, guys. Super chat here from Brian saying, watching from Huntsville, Alabama with my engineer grandmother who worked on the early shuttle in the Columbia era, rooting SpaceX on. Brian, thank you so much for the kind words. I'm glad that your grandmother is enjoying this as well. We appreciate it. And a big thank you for her work on the space program as well.
Can I talk for 15 minutes about shuttle now?
I know you would if I didn't tell you not to.
Yep.
Let's see here. I'm going to pull up some questions from the queue here. Here's a good one asking, will there be any use for Falcon Heavy when Starship is complete?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, what do you think, Chris?
Yes, I do, because they've said that while Starship will be their vehicle of choice, if customers required it, they would utilize Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy. So I reckon they will still have a fleet of boosters, as they are right now. Let's face it, they're not producing lots of new boosters. We remember the pictures from the Hawthorne factory floor of these boosters lined up, these brand new boosters. They're landing them so many times now that they can reuse them enough where they've got a stable of Falcon 9 boosters, which they can then utilize on missions again and again. I think they will always have that stable while customers are still saying, we need a dedicated Falcon 9 launch, we need a dedicated Falcon Heavy launch, rather than being part of a Starship launch. The price point will be the question, of course. It's whether or not, if you want to share maybe a co-manifest with a Starship launch, if it's cheaper than launching on your own dedicated Falcon 9, maybe that will sway more and more customers towards Starship. But I think there will always be customers for those rockets, and they will keep them going until their life runs out. And if they build new ones, and you'll see there's always a plan to keep them going after Starship's operational. But personally, yeah, I know for a fact I've said that while customers still demand it, they will keep these vehicles going.
Continuing on, I'm going to keep the questions going. Like we said, we're watching a cryogenic proof test right now. You can see the frost continuing to build up on the side as they continue to pump more liquid nitrogen into the vehicle. This is basically a leak check for the vehicle prior to beginning fueling for actual propellants and beginning static fire tests and things like that. A big key milestone ahead of a flight that could occur later this week based on airspace restrictions, but we're looking at cryogenic proof today, which is now, after an abort earlier, looks like it's going much better this time around. But while we do that, I will keep answering some questions. It's both myself, Thomas Burkhart. We also got Chris Bergen here on the stream. I know we've got Michael Baylor working in the background, and then Jack Byers popping in every once in a while as well. Not sure if he's on comms right now or not, but we got the NASASpaceflight team here answering your questions. So, a question here from Rob. Do we know which Raptor engines are installed on SN10? Do we know the serial numbers? Chris, you might know.
We do, but I've forgotten, so I'm going to check.
Okay, Chris is going to go check on that.
Right.
It's not going to be... One of them I remember was like in the 30s or
SN50 and
something.
SN39, but we don't know the other one.
Okay, so 50, 39, which is kind of surprising because that's an older engine. And then we don't know, we didn't see the number of the third one. But all three are installed, yes?
That's right.
Yeah. A somewhat related question. Keith wants to know, have they completed the cleanup of SN9 yet? So are there still Raptor guts over on the landing pad? Or are they cleaned that up yet? What's the status of that?
I don't know, actually. I know that we've seen Mary's videos where they're cleaning it up. I don't think if Mary can hear us in the back channel, tell us if not they've cleaned it all up yet. There's quite a lot of debris, wasn't there? So
Right,
it might take a while, but yeah. I know the last we saw they were cleaning it up. I don't know how far they've progressed to the point where they finished it now. Hang on, Mary's typing, so we'll find out.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're getting an answer from the expert here.
Yeah,
Mary
I
will
don't.
know.
I can't answer for her.
But, yeah, I mean, the big milestone is once they clear the landing pad, then they can proceed likely to an SN10 test flight. And since they have those airspace restrictions filed, in theory, if they're not done yet, they're very close to being done. But as long as the landing pad's clear, if they're still cleaning up other areas, as long as it doesn't impose a launch risk or a landing risk, they could in theory proceed.
Mary
says she believes there's still some remains on the pad, so they're working on it, but they're not done yet. Thank you, Mary. So they're working on it, but hopefully that means they're close to being done, because, like we said, flight as early as Thursday according to the airspace closures. So a good indicator that they're almost done. But thank you, Mary, and thank you for the question, Keith. Let's see here. Matlan with another question here. What resources does the moon have that can make it viable as a possible launch base? So there is ice on the moon, so you can create liquid oxygen and hydrogen from there. So that for rockets that utilize those propellants, obviously most rockets use liquid oxygen these days, so that's useful. I think there are actually enough resources to also produce liquid methane on the lunar surface. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's also enough carbon in regolith that you could extract it and do in situ methane production as well. I know you could I know there's water ice, so I know you could do hydrogen and oxygen. So between those two, of course, Starship does not use liquid hydrogen, so it would need to do methane production. Off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure they can do that on the moon as well. A question here from Purnell. Does SN10 use helium pressurization like SN9 or autogeneous pressurization like SN8? I do not know. I don't think Elon has commented officially on this. What I do think is SN8 had that pressurization problem, which they solved by adding helium pressurization. I'm going to assume that they're not going back to autogeneous pressurization already, because that was a problem that actually caused the SN8 crash. So I'm going to guess they're still doing helium pressurization on SN10, but we don't have an official answer on that.
Meanwhile, it's getting pretty frosty.
Yeah.
And we did not see. So for the previous cryo-proof tests of SN8 and SN9, the vehicle did not actually get that frosty. So I'm not sure how much beyond this we're going to see, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did not see much more frost than this. So if what I'm basically saying is if the frost goes away at this point without a lot more frost, I would not be too concerned about it. Of course, the internal pressure can still be high, even with not a ton of liquid nitrogen in the tanks. We'll see what happens, but looking good so far.
Got a question here asking what actually ignites the Raptor. So do we know what kind of igniters Raptor uses, or if there's like a T-tab thing that Falcon 9 uses? What do we know about Raptor ignition? Because that could have been a source of the problem for SN9.
It's a sparkler type situation, if I'm not mistaken. It's
Or like a spark igniter?
It doesn't use any kind of additional like TEB or anything like that. It's just a sparkler, like a fancy grill igniter.
Well, there you go. So there answers your question. A question here asking, did they remove the wires that hold the wings in place before this test? I believe not. All the flaps are still tied down, right? Or chained down?
Well, that's what usually is, isn't it? But I remember Mary's video last night showed them playing with the flaps.
Oh, did
I don't know
they?
if that. Yeah, they were. They were
Mary's
open
typing
now.
again, so we're gonna wait for the expert to answer here.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
Yeah. Let's go to the source of the matter.
yeah, I don't know why I'm asking you guys. I should just be asking Mary.
I just know from Mary's videos. The
Mary
flaps
says
are
the flaps
secured.
are secure. So yeah, like I said, see, I know what I'm talking about. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, so the flaps are still secured at this time. They'll unchain them or whatever closer to the flight test. Here is a good question from Cody saying, which rockets will Starship directly compete with in the launch market once it's operational? Right now, I mean, okay, I guess you could argue SLS to an extent, but they might also just end up serving different roles, even though they're in the same class of like lift vehicle. I think the bigger competitor of Starship might come along if Blue Origin New Armstrong ever comes to fruition, because that's because if you look at Blue Origin is the only other big launch provider pursuing fully reusable vehicles. So if you're limiting yourself to that kind of class of vehicle, you look at New Glenn, which is their first orbital vehicle, debuting in theory this year, maybe next year, which is a Falcon Heavy competitor. And then their next step, we know that they have plans for a notional New Armstrong design that we don't know much about, but would likely be Starship class. So fully reusable, not partially reusable, and then sort of super heavy lift capabilities. So that would be one, if that ever comes up. Again, that might be a couple years down the line. Starship definitely has the jump on that, just like SpaceX has the jump with Falcon Heavy versus New Glenn. But in theory, that could be a competition. SLS is a different kind of role, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna leak some L2 information here because I'm allowed to.
Because you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, the new Armstrong apparently could be just another stage on top of the on a New Glenn type vehicle where it doesn't make it all that massive. It's like a Block 2 SLS compared to the Block 1B or Block 1. There is another vehicle apparently being looked at within Blue Origin, which Blue Origin not talked about. No one that sourced Blue Origin told me this, but a NASA person has seen it, and it's got in brackets that the name is. It won't give me the name, but in brackets it had Starship Killer.
Huh.
So that's what they're up at. Now, to be careful here, these people do tend to have little internal jerks, and that's when you get to hear them.
Right.
But that would be a different kind of vehicle. I think Blue Origin's seen what SpaceX is doing here and thinking we want one of those. So don't be surprised if you see a completely new kind of vehicle for Blue Origin in about 5 years' time. There may be one of those coming up along the line. I'm sure they're thinking about it. They were looking at crew launch and everything like that, so not just New Shepard. So there's a lot of things to come from Blue Origin. The thing with Blue Origin is they're so secretive, you just don't know. All we know right now is New Glenn. And in fact, during the last New Shepard launch webcast, they did not show New Glenn at all. They showed the B4.
They showed the B4, right?
Yeah. But nothing, absolutely nothing about this humongous launch site and production area they've got at Cape Canaveral. Nothing at all. I thought, why on earth would you not even show that? Because their webcasts are very customer orientated. That's why they go, hey, it's so wonderful here in this wonderful West Texas. It's wonderful. We love it here. Oh, such a wonderful launch. They do that on purpose, not for us. We benefit from watching it, but they do it for the customers because they're trying to sell seats on New Shepard. And that's why they do it that way. That's why Virgin Galactic do all their fluffy materials, because they're aiming at very rich people who want to go suborbital for a second. The idea is that the fact they didn't show New Glenn, it was weird to me, because I thought that was a way of showing how big company they are, and they avoided it for some reason. So that's very Blue Origin of them. They just don't do things the way we expect them to do, and they keep everything close to their chest. So in that respect, their future plans are very secretive as well. You only hear snippets. I think they will surprise us.
And just quickly on the current test, it looks like the frost is decreasing. If you rewind your YouTube player a couple of minutes, you can do an A/B test and compare the frost levels, but we often see some condensation on the top of the liquid oxygen on the top of the liquid oxygen tank for whatever reason when they detank. So I'm not sure if that's what's happening, but it could be that they are now detanking. We should know more in the next couple of minutes as we see the frost change. We have also seen on previous tests sometimes the frost goes up and down and up and down, so it's possible the frost could go back up, but as of now, it's possible that they are detanking after a potentially successful test. I don't know for sure, but you can see on that methane tank right now the frost line is almost gone.
Question here asking, which starship do you think will be the first to land? I'm going to be optimistic and say SN10 sticks the landing. Chris, thoughts?
SN10.
Alright, there. Michael, any differing opinions?
SN10.
Jack?
Not on comms.
Oh, Jack's not on comms anymore? Okay, never mind.
Let's ask chat.
Whichever one
chat
it
as well.
is, I hope I'm there for it. That's all I gotta say.
Well, that
I
ties
really
into
want to
my
see the
next
first one
question.
land.
That ties into my next question. Chat wants to know if you're going back to Boca Chica, Jack.
Yeah, yes, probably yes.
Okay, cool. Let's see here. Question, how many starships do you think SpaceX will send to Mars on their first opportunity, or the transfer window? I don't know. I'm tempted to say just one, just because you won't know if it'll work or not. So if you send two, and the first one doesn't work, and you're like, oh, we figured out why it didn't work, you can't fix the other one because it's already on the way. So I feel like maybe the first transfer window, they only send one, unless they're really confident in some reason that it will work. But I don't know. I kind of feel like you only send one the first time. Maybe that's just me. Let's see here. A question here. What do you guys think the timeline will be for the first crewed Starship on Mars versus the first crewed Artemis mission on the Moon? So first Artemis landing on the Moon is no earlier than the 2024 timeline.
No chance.
No chance of that happening. Yeah, no, totally agree.
No chance.
But if you let's broaden that and just think second half of the 2020s. Is that a reasonable estimate?
Yes.
Okay, so let's say that first crewed landing on Mars. Let's just forget whether it's Starship or not, even though I'm not sure any other vehicle that it might be at this point. Assuming it's a Starship, that's not happening till 2030s, right? Maybe. I mean, could it happen before 2030? I mean, this is the problem. It's so early. It's hard to predict that.
It's really it's difficult, because when you're worn down by S-less delays, any schedule you immediately think to the right. You're so hype about Starship, any schedules you immediately think to the left. So it's weird how it works, but I think the way SpaceX works, and the evidence of how SpaceX works, the way they drive things forward, they don't achieve the schedules that Elon puts out on Twitter, but the fact that he puts that pressure on, and they don't take the pressure too seriously, where to the point where they make mistakes, they go at their pace, but their pace is naturally higher because of it. NASA is paying Boeing more money for the more delays they have. Where's the motivation? You know, Boeing charged NASA $1 billion because they were going to be a year late. What kind of how on earth do you work on that kind of basis? It's literally more profit if you delay what your delivery dates are. That is ridiculous, and that's got to change. SpaceX don't work to that mentality, and that's why I think there's a greater chance of their achievements being sooner than we perceive, compared to S-less's schedule being realistic. which it isn't. This 2024 landing was political. It always was. It was designed to be a bookmark to a second term of a presidency. That's what it was aimed for. That's no longer the case, so that's changed. And now we're going to see how much that date sticks, because right now that schedule is not sticking.
I think a crewed Starship on Mars by 2030 is a tall order. I don't think it's impossible.
Right,
just-
you can't rule it out yet, though.
Well, they just started landing Falcon 9s in the last 5-ish years, right? 5 years ago. And if you
2015, yeah.
Yeah, and if you extrapolate 5 years from now, I mean, just think where we could be, and that's not even, you know, that would be 2026, 2027 time frame. 5 years from now, I have every expectation that this system is launching cargo, and, you know, at the very least, much, much further along in its development cycle than it is right now. And we've already seen an acceleration in this development cycle from Starhopper, and then a year later SN5, and then a month after SN5, SN6, and now we're starting to see Starships just roll off the assembly line left and right. I mean, as evidenced by Starship 9 and 10 both being on the pad at the same time. To underestimate the scope and speed that they're going to move at and continue to accelerate. I mean, I don't see this pace slowing down from here. I only see this pace of development speeding up, and that is the kind of thing that they would have to achieve in order to get a crewed Starship on the moon or on Mars in a reasonable time frame. So I've said it before, say it again, Mars 2030. Let's do it.
Yep. And let's look at the evidence. SN18 is out there. It's under construction. It's out of the production tents. We don't even know what's inside a production tent. It could be SN1920.
Oh,
you know, as far as
gosh.
bulkheads go and what have you.
To look
Mary
inside
is
those
spotted
tents, I
outside
can't even.
SN18.
Yeah, 18 is, and like you said, we don't even know what parts are being built currently inside the tents, or say at Hawthorne, or we don't know how many Raptors exist, but definitely there's no slowing down here.
Let's see here.
Clearly,
Go
the
ahead,
throttles continues to decrease, so
Yeah.
I think they probably completed the test. Hopefully, we'll get some indication of whether or not it was successful from Elon on Twitter, although I'm not sure that proof tests are exciting enough these days for Elon to comment on them, but most likely the confirmation we will get is if they proceed to a static fire on Wednesday, which is the next road closure. So no road closure scheduled for tomorrow, but there is a road closure on Wednesday, and if they go straight to a static fire, that would be an indication that the proof test was a success. Of course, if they redo the proof test, that would be an indication that it was not a success. We will also wait to see if the road opens today, right after the teams return to the pad. If they do reopen the road once Starship has been safed, that would be another indication that they're done for today, which could be a good sign. They still have about 3.5 hours remaining in the window, so if there was a problem, they could theoretically make another attempt today.
But right now, this looks a lot more like the successful cryo test that we've seen already. So no, we're not seeing any signs that this was an abort or anything, right?
No.
Right. Okay. Question here: which Starship is going to use the new 3mm thick steel? I believe that is part of the SN15 upgrades. We think, right?
We don't. Yeah, SN15 is the next major upgrades, as Elon said. We don't know what those upgrades are, but it goes without saying that the tested SM7.2 with the 3mm, and you think that works the timeline for SM15. So yeah, I would probably it'd be a safe assumption to say SM15.
Gotcha. A super chat question here: how can Starship land on Mars with no atmosphere? So Mars does have an atmosphere. It's a very thin atmosphere. It's thinner than on Earth, but Mars has an atmosphere. Either way, Starship can land both places with atmosphere and without. When it has an atmosphere, it does that belly flop maneuver to take advantage of that, and then connects the landing burn at the last second. But Starship can also land on the moon where there is no atmosphere, and that way you don't do a belly flop maneuver. It's just a purely propulsive landing. Which is a lot easier on the moon because the gravity is not as high, so you actually need less propellant. But Starship can land on Mars, taking advantage of the thin atmosphere. And Neo with a super chat, what is the timeline for Earth-to-Earth Starship, and is that why the oil rigs were bought? We don't know exactly what the oil rigs are for, other than they're for Starship operations of some kind. Whether they'll be used for Earth-to-Earth flights, or for more operational orbital flights, things like that, we don't know for sure. And we don't really have a firm timeline for Earth-to-Earth Starship, but I think it was within the next few years that Elon said they wanted those first test flights to occur. In fact, if I covered this in an article not too long ago, and there might have actually been a date from Elon in there somewhere, so I'm going to go check that really quick. If I can find it. Earth to Earth something. Preparing, yep, this one. I will try to find an answer for you, Neil. But while I do that, I'm going to leave a question for Chris here. Let's see here. Here's a good one. Do you think once Starship is proven to be a reliable and operational vehicle, will NASA select other providers for the sake of maintaining competition? Well, so if Starship's the only sort of super heavy lift, fully reusable vehicle, will NASA continue to use partially reusable or even fully expendable vehicles alongside that to sort of diversify their launch provider base? Is that something you would see NASA doing?
Yes, I think NASA's got a history of that via elements of that very reason to keep everyone happy as far as contracts go, and keeps the redundancy of capability going, because you don't want a vehicle basically being starved out of the game, and then suddenly the one you're using all the time has a problem, and you're left with no vehicles to provide the upmass you need for your missions. And secondly, because of lobbyists, yeah, you're always going to have people poking the political class for the funding, saying, we need this kind of money going towards our district and what have you. And that's where the likes of ULA come in handy. But to be fair to ULA, they've never had a full failure. And I think that's to their credit. They are a lot more expensive, but they are reliable. And when you're a customer who has a government contract, and your payload is not going to benefit from any kind of like savings on that, you want the reliability, and that's where the likes of launching a Delta IV Heavy still becomes viable for like the NRO. It's those kind of things, and I think SpaceX has got a lot to go there still. They've got the NSSL contract from 39A, where we're going to see a new structure at 39A, by the way, which will be the vertical capability of mating payloads. We're also going to have all these new vehicles from New Glenn coming online, which will be competing in the same kind of regime as Falcon Heavy. And I think I just think it's where NASA works. I can't see NASA ever going sole provider as a kind of like the provider of choice on anything like that. I think while other companies have got the capability, they will spread out the wealth as such, because a healthy US launch industry is good for them and it makes sense. So the long answer to that is, well, that's basically a yes.
Circling back to that question about Earth to Earth, the most recent estimate from Elon, which was June of last year, says that the first Earth to Earth test flights might be in 2 or 3 years, and that was of last year. So think 2022, 2023 timeline for the first Earth to Earth test flights. So hopefully that answers that question from earlier.
A huge fan of Earth to Earth, by the way. I keep saying it every stream. Someone brings up a question about Earth to Earth. I just keep saying it'd be an ultimate game changer. And yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are issues with how they can get away with that kind of thing with local authorities and what have you, especially with the FAA. So there's lots of challenges involved there. But if you can set up one route and prove it, I think it would be just such an amazing thing for somebody to launch from one side of the planet to the other within an hour, that I think it would just strike the imagination of authorities and other countries to say, we want this. And I think it could be the start of something special if they can just prove it. So yeah, I hope it happens somehow.
As far as timelines go, we got a question here from a Felix saying, didn't Elon say cargo missions to Mars in 2022 and a crewed mission in 2024? I do remember him saying that, but that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
When he made that estimate. I think that was an optimistic estimate at the time, and I think that possibility may have slipped. I'm not sure they're going to be ready for cargo to Mars by next year. Again, we can't rule it out yet, but I think that's an outdated estimate. At one point, that was the plan, yes.
That's going back to what we're talking about Elon's schedules. They are extremely tight to the point that they're not capable of doing it because they are just so optimistic. But I'm sure, I mean, he's a businessman. He knows what he's doing. You know, he brings out these schedules as a kind of driving like a stick, saying, look, this is what I want. And then SpaceX come back, like Gwen, people like that, come back to him and say, okay, but maybe not that soon. But the net result is a lot faster than if he never set that kind of target. That's management. That's perfect management. And I think that's why he does it a lot, especially in public on Twitter. It's just the driving force behind what SpaceX is like, to set really ambitious targets. Maybe not achieve them all the time, obviously, but get so close to them that they're a lot sooner than they would have been if you had no one like Elon in charge and they were just going at their own pace. So I think that's... I always find that a positive. I really do. I think, you know, Elon's standard time he doesn't like, and I'm sure he doesn't like that. I hope he's not listening. You know, it's just
I've already been
something
called out on Twitter by that, by the way. So
yeah, be careful. But I just think it's a positive thing because we've seen the results. I go back to what I was saying about Mary's first videos and photographs. Go back 2 years. You see none of this. It's all being built up in short order compared to anywhere else. Even Blue Origin, their facility at Cape Canaveral, has taken quite a long time to build up to where it is. It's impressive, but it's got no rocket out there. They've not launched anything from there yet. The way SpaceX do things is just so motivated. It makes you want to, you know, root for them. It really does, because they are doing what we all would do if we were in charge of a rocket company. It's push, 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 and go for these big goals. You know, that's not been done for years. I'm a fan of shuttle. It was stuck in low Earth orbit. It was never capable of going out of low Earth orbit. You know, this is something that will take us to Mars. And it's inspiring.
I think I couldn't have said it better, Chris. I mean, we're all limited by the timescales of human life, and as such, we want to see exciting, cool things happen in our lifetimes, and that means quickly, because human timescales are not long. So to have a company like SpaceX pushing as hard as they are, with look at that vent. Is it a depress?
maybe the frost is decreasing, so this could be sort of the end of the test, maybe.
But yeah, we all want to see stuff happen and happen soon. So that's part of why this is all so exciting, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's see here. Got a question here. Will starships always be made in Boca Chica, or are we expecting them to be made at the Cape as well? I believe we are expecting parallel construction at Cape Canaveral once they get past test flights in Boca Chica. We know they're still planning to launch Starship from 39A at Kennedy Space Center, so those vehicles would likely be produced at a new facility in Florida, right?
Yeah, I can't pronounce the names of the places, so forgive me in advance. But Citro, is it? Citro or Kirko?
Citco, something like that.
Citco,
like
CIDCO, Citco.
That was initially, as Elon put, as in a competition, like a race for the Mark 1, the Mark 2 and things like that. So they initially did that set up to be a Florida and Boca Chica race of dual processing flows. That facility is no longer producing starships. It's still active in a kind of small way, but it's not producing starships. But they have another facility closer to KSC, which is at Roberts Road, and I think that's
actually within the Space Center, maybe.
There we go. Yeah, thanks to Harry Stranger with his eyes on satellite photographs being updated, he's noticed there is kind of some groundwork going on there now. So they are building up a facility, and we think that could be related to we think it's related to Starship. It makes sense it is. And that Starship will eventually go to 39A, which has got the facility already kind of like partly built, but it's been mothballed for a while. So yes, this is a short answer to that one, but it's something exciting because I think Boca Chica is all focused on Boca Chica right now. Once they get these vehicles shaking out and operational, then we can keep a very close eye on Florida and see how they're going to produce the vehicles, roll them out, and put them on the pad. And what they will launch from Florida will be extremely exciting because that will double the launch cadence technically when you've got the extra facility. So it's very exciting when you've got Phoebos and Deimos as well. There's so many things they could do with this vehicle from the facility they've got already known out there.
Absolutely. I'm gonna go get a couple super chat questions really quick. Boom saying Chris B for new NASA admin. I think he fails the naturalized U.S. citizen requirement, but you know. And I wouldn't be
You don't
surprised
want
if
to.
they launch us. Nope, go ahead.
Yeah, you don't want me in charge of NASA. It would go downhill very fast.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they launch a Starship to Mars in the 22 window just to see if they can. I think I could see them throwing like a prototype Starship, one with no payload on board, literally throw a heat shield on it and see if it can survive Martian entry and attempt a landing.
Yeah.
I could see that maybe. But even doing that by 2022 might be a tall order. They might not even get to orbit in 2022 if they have some sort of setback. Right now, it's sounding like end of this year, beginning of next year is their first orbital attempt-ish. So, you know, you got to balance that. But we'll wait and see. A tip here from Lauge, maybe? Greetings from Denmark. I hope I got your name right, but appreciate the support and thank you so much. Glad you're enjoying. Here's a quick question. It doesn't have to do with Starship per se, but I know Chris will have some thoughts on it. Will you cover the ABL launch from the Shetland Islands next year? I know there's some talk of a new small lift launch vehicle from over in the UK, Chris.
Yeah, the interesting thing is 2 launch sites now in the mix.
Right,
For
yeah.
the UK, both in the north of Scotland. One's the Sutherland, right on the top of the country, and one in the Shetlands, which is the Lockheed Martin launch, which was mentioned today. Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, it's Jack will laugh at me, but it's an 8-hour drive, so I will have to stop over somewhere in Scotland overnight and then do the second leg later the next day, because there's no way am I driving 8 hours non-stop. So, but I'll do it definitely, yeah. And I don't know about the live stream though, because I think the internet up there will be horrendous. So
We'll get DOS on the case. We'll ship the
Yeah.
solo out to you. You'll be set up.
Starlink by then.
There you go.
Oh yeah,
Get
yeah,
a
exactly,
Starlink
yeah.
right.
So yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I'm definitely doing it. So it's a question of what we can, you know. I'm rubbish with cameras though. I'll be literally live streaming my shoes for about 3 hours.
We'll set you up, Chris. We'll make sure you're set up. But yeah, that'll be very cool to see some new launch sites in some other countries come online. Let's see here. Let's see. Do you think the next Starship test flight is going to ignite all 3 engines, then cut off 1, using 2 to do the landing, or just step back to 2 engine to do the land? So it sounds like the change they're going to make is, instead of lighting 2 for the flip and shutting down 1 to do the final landing, they're going to light all 3. If they all work, shut down the extra 1, still using the other 2 to do the flip, and then shut down one of them and go back to 1 engine for the landing. The change they're making is just lighting all 3 at the beginning, so if one of them fails, they can complete the landing using some combination of the other 2. So I hope that answers your question. Are there any missions for Falcon Heavy planned this year? Yes, there is the USSF-44 mission, a classified mission for the U.S. Space Force, launching on Falcon Heavy later this year. There is also USSF-52, which I think is still planned for this year. Those missions have had that tendency to slip a little bit, but I think there's those 2, and then possibly a Viasat-3 communications satellite that's going on Falcon Heavy. So I think up to 3 this year, but at least 1. I think that first USSF mission is pretty firmly this year, so at least 1, up to 3 is my answer for that. And then, can Starship take off directly to orbit from the Mars surface? Yes, Starship can SSTO from any celestial body other than Earth, basically. Any moons and any of the other rocky planets. Mars, or, well, I guess I should say that because I don't know if we can do it from Venus. Venus is a whole other ballgame. But from Mars, from the moon, and from, like, the outer moons of, like, Jupiter or Saturn and stuff like that, which are some places they've mentioned as future destinations, all of those Starship can handle without any sort of booster or anything like that.
Can I go off on a tangent again, like I always do?
Please do.
There's something we're forgetting, and that is the launch capability, the proving out technology, the TPS, the refilling and what have you. For crew launches, it means nothing unless you get the life support system sorted out. The life support system for a beyond Earth orbit mission is huge. It's a massive undertaking. We've seen the challenges in the ISS. Every day, the ISS daily reports mention a oxygen regenerator, the water regenerator failing or something like that. They have to do repairs all the time, and they get the resupplies from cargo missions, which bring up spare parts. when you're on the way to Mars, you've got no resupply missions which can help you out. You're going to be able to repair it there and then in situ. And you need a system that's going to work continuously without fault, with redundancy, all the way to Mars and back and what have you. So it's a lot of work involved to get the life support system working. So it'd be cargo missions for a long time to shake out the vehicle and the architecture, and then they're going to do a lot of work on life support. And I would assume a lot of shakeout missions in low Earth orbit, so they can deorbit and get back pretty soon if they have a problem. And it's a major challenge. It really is. Technically, Orion is ahead of the game on that. Would you believe? Because it has a life support system that they believe will work. But even Orion, the first crew mission, will spend 36 hours in low Earth orbit shaking out the life support system before they do the translunar ejection burn, because they've got to be so careful with this life support system. And that is just to the moon. So you can imagine how much work they've got to do on Starship. The only thing I do remember, and I don't know if it's still the case or was ever the case, but I do remember some mention from Paragon saying they were working with SpaceX. It could have been Crew Dragon, but if it was with Starship as well, they are the world leaders in life support systems, Paragon. So if they are working with those in the background, I've got a lot of hope and optimism towards Starship's future life support system. But there's a lot of habitable car space in the top of Starship, a lot of space there that you've got to have to support humans riding in it. It's going to be a big, big question that's not been properly answered yet. The life support system for Starship.
Gotcha. Some more questions here. Let's see. According to a wiki, there are approximately 129 million things orbiting Earth. Are launch windows getting smaller as satellites are launched? You know, this has been mentioned once before. I forget which company was talking about it, but we're getting to some fairly frequent launches, especially as Starlink deployment kind of ramps up. And you're not hearing any sort of on-orbit collision warnings that have resulted in these COLA windows, collision on orbit launch assessment or something like that, something along those lines.
I was going to sound clever by knowing that. So.
The risk, basically the risk of hitting something during launch because it's something already in orbit. That doesn't really come up that often, so I don't think that we're seeing a significant impact on that, as far on launch windows as far as that goes.
I think the fact that we've seen so little of those warnings suggests that isn't a problem yet.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
A question here: isn't lighting all 3 Raptors just putting a band-aid on the wound? Lighting all out of fear of one failing does not seem viable. I think it is a temporary fix, with the permanent fix just being continuing to test the Raptor engines and them just becoming more reliable. At some point it might not be needed, but even then, if you can light all 3 Raptors and then shut down the extra one quickly enough, that is just a great form of engine out redundancy, which Starship is supposed to have anyway. So I think honestly they should just do that going forward, and probably will, because as reliable as Raptor gets, you still won't ever have zero risk of an engine failure. And so to account for that, I think this 3 Raptor lighting scenario isn't really a bad thing. It's just a smart step to mitigate the risk, while they also mitigate it by making Raptor a more reliable engine. So it's a combination.
Totally agree with that, by the way. I think there's lots of benefits. I just want to again stress the point, this is only going to be the 3rd ever launch of this vehicle. The fact that they've got the vehicle to prove it can belly flop under control is huge. It really is huge. It doesn't matter how many computational fluid dynamics models you've got, or how many there's no history of this. They've done something new for the first time, and it works. They've just got to let the landing right, and they're going to learn from the 2 failures they've had. It's just 2, and that is always something they perceived was going to be the case, because that's what they built so many starships. You're not going to build all these starships if you think the first one's going to work perfectly well. No problem at all. You build lots of starships because then when one fails, you got another one coming down Highway 4. It's ready to go. It's crazy. It sounds surreal, but that's what they've done, and it's going to work out for them in the long run. So I think just a little bit of calibration here, that these issues they had are solvable, and it's right at the end of the flight profile. This is not a vehicle that blows up going uphill. This is not a vehicle that nosedives when it tries to do a belly flop. Everything else is right. It's just got to get that last final thing right.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Got some more questions. We're going to keep them coming. Thank you so much to everyone who's supporting the stream and sending in questions. We love it. Who will be going to Mars? Will it be NASA astronauts or SpaceX astronauts or something else? So when we're talking about Starship landing specifically, I think it is a very, very safe bet to say that the first crewed landing on Mars will include NASA astronauts. It will also hopefully include international astronauts from other space agencies. And it might also include non-government astronauts. But I think the safest bet is that there will be NASA astronauts on board, whether or not they're accompanied by representatives from SpaceX or other just private astronauts, as well as astronauts from other government space agencies other than NASA, is kind of remains to be seen. But NASA is very involved in the Starship program, and it's because Starship could end up being that first vehicle that presents that Mars landing capability, and NASA's going to want to be involved in that. So, and SpaceX will be happy to have them, for the record, don't you think, Chris?
I agree, totally.
So, NASA astronauts plus perhaps others, but definitely NASA will be involved. NASA will also likely be involved in the first cargo missions. They're going to want to have, hey, we have some extra experiments that, didn't quite fit on Perseverance or stuff like that, but we'd love to fly to Mars as well. Could we stick them on Starship? And Starship will say yes, because Starship is huge, and there will be plenty of room. So,
I will add as well,
that kind of thing will happen too.
I will add that it's not just the fact that an astronaut is needed because it's so complicated to fly a ship. It's not. The SpaceX, especially Crew Dragon, is not complicated. It's still complex. It's not something I could fly, but it's something that, you don't need 2 years of training to fly like a shuttle. It's something that is a lot more intuitive and a lot easier to control. It's a lot more automated. But the fact is, with astronauts, is you've got a different caliber of mentality. If you ever speak to an astronaut, they are a different breed. I say it every time when I talk to friends. When I interviewed Gene Cernan, I spent about an hour staring at the wall because the actual stature of the man coming across a microphone was surreal. He just sounded like a different breed of human. They're so focused and they're so well trained. I'm sure it's with military pilots as well. I'm sure it's the same with them. They are just so focused and trained that you want that kind of person on the board with you. Because if they have problems, you don't want everyone running around screaming with their hair on fire. You want someone with that kind of mentality who can say, right, solve it, fix it, get everything sorted. And that is where an astronaut would come in very handy for that kind of situation.
Also, NASA astronauts are the ones with experience on conducting scientific research, which is going to be largely the point of many early missions. SpaceX engineers are going to be great at operating the vehicle, perhaps setting up, propellant depots and things like that, preparing that kind of infrastructure. But you're going to want to go to NASA to conduct research on that mission. So that's another reason completely agreeing with you, Chris. Let's see here. Next question. We got a super chat question here. With Jeff Bezos stepping down from Amazon, do you expect Blue Origin to quicken its timeline now that he can give it some full-time attention? I believe that we have seen that. So if you're unaware, Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, also founder of Blue Origin, is no longer CEO of Amazon. He still works there, but he's not CEO.
Well,
and he just said he did.
I forget what the date is. I think he's still the CEO.
Yeah, it's happening Q2 at some point.
Yeah.
So hasn't happened yet, but it's going to. But he said he did that so that he will have more time to work on his other projects, which includes Blue Origin, among other things. So that is possible that there might be, we mentioned that Elon can crack the whip in Boca Chica and, try and quicken the pace a little bit if he sees things kind of stagnating too much. I don't know if Bezos has that kind of can he go crack the whip at Blue Origin? Maybe he has that, and I would love to see that. So maybe that's a thing. But I think we'll have to wait and see. I don't know. We haven't had much chance to see that kind of involvement from Bezos at Blue Origin per se. So we'll wait and see.
What I've got there is the current person who's in charge of Blue Origin is not someone who's particularly liked by the Blue Origin people I speak to, without getting too deep into that. Not disliked for any kind of bad reason, but the fact that he's not very driven. So if Jeff Bezos gets more of a grip on it, maybe changes some of the leadership at Blue Origin to a more dynamic and more driven kind of mentality, maybe they will speed up the pace a little bit. And I think with his concentration on this program now being more than on the 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 Black Friday sales on Amazon, we might start seeing that now. I personally think that will happen.
It will be very interesting to see. Question here, what is the update with the Starship launchpad at Launch Complex 39A? Are they still building it? We haven't heard or seen anything in over a year. Yes, they are still planning to use 39A. I don't think they've made any hardware changes recently. Like you said, we haven't seen anything. But we believe it's just on hold because all the development work is currently happening where you're looking right now at Boca Chica.
Yep.
And so until they can complete those test flights and progress on vehicle development, they're not going to pursue more at Kennedy Space Center. Once Starship is getting closer to an operational vehicle, then they're going to say, okay, let's bring Cape Canaveral online as a second launch site, second land-based launch site at least, for operational Starship missions. And there's definitely going to be some parallel there between the Starship missions at Kennedy Space Center and the human landing system. If SpaceX gets selected as a human landing system provider, there will definitely be some incentive to fly those missions from Kennedy Space Center in conjunction with a NASA center as far as logistics is concerned. So, yes, 39A is still happening. You just won't see much until they're getting ready to launch operational missions from there versus a development program which is happening mostly in Texas.
Is it me, or is things getting more frosty?
Well, you know, I was gonna point that out. Is the frost increasing again? Because
Let's do some streaming
that
backwards and
big
forwards.
sort of block of frost that we're seeing from this game review, I don't think was there earlier.
Yeah, it's definitely increased, but sometimes when they detank, it gets a bit like this, doesn't it? So it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
I think we'll go watch the vents.
The tank farm activity is still kind of active.
Yeah. We'll see if it
We'll
goes
keep
higher
an
than
eye
that
on it.
line. That line we see there has stayed the same. It's just the frost that's gone below it. But if it goes any higher, if the methane tank gets a frost line, then we'll keep an eye on that.
Regardless, the test is still ongoing, so we
Yep.
will... Yeah, even from this view, though, you can see some more frost has kind of come back, I think. Regardless, they are still ongoing with the cryogenic test for today. Let's see.
Often when they detank, the condensation forms for whatever reason, but
Okay.
we're not seeing any frost on the methane tank right now.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Question here is saying, how many project managers does SpaceX have? The amount of concurrent building at Boca is amazing. Safe to say a lot.
Yeah. At least 150.
Yeah, right. If NASA doesn't choose SpaceX for developing the lunar Starship, do you think they'll cancel it entirely? P.S. I know my name is a tongue twister. Lauge, I don't know if I got it right the first time, but you didn't correct me, so I'm going to say it again. Hopefully I got it right. Yeah, if NASA doesn't choose Starship as a human landing system provider, which I've mentioned before, I feel like Starship is the surest bet as far as an HLS pick is concerned, but if it doesn't get selected, I could maybe see SpaceX canceling that particular variant and using a more generic Starship vehicle to land on the moon. It's possible that SpaceX might not have the same requirements as NASA does for a lunar lander. They might want to have a vehicle that not just travels between lunar orbit and the lunar surface like the human landing system variant does, and rather has one with the control surfaces and things like that, so it can return from the moon and land directly back on Earth. So it's possible they move to a different variant of Starship for lunar missions. So I can see that happening.
Go on, Michael.
SpaceX is not going to, build the capability to dock with Orion or the Gateway into their own Starship unless NASA provides funding, I don't think.
What I think is if NASA selects Blue Origin national team, we'll see some big SpaceXer at Boca Chica take a big tin of paint, throw it all over that lunar, over that mock-up, over the NASA logo, and write "Who's Jeff" on it. Jeff who?
I don't know. They could change what the lunar version of Starship looks like. And like Michael said, it could be that docking interface kind of goes away, and it's a all-inclusive vehicle on its own instead of having to dock to another one. But I don't think they wouldn't cancel their plans to fly Starship to the moon for sure.
I honestly think Blue Origin's actually leading. By the way, I'd like to
for
see
human
Starship
landing
win it,
system.
but I think Blue Origin's got so many contractors involved. I think it's NASA's thing. We're going back to earlier about spreading the wealth. I think they're leading in that respect. The only question is how far along development wise they are compared to Starship.
Starship has a taller mountain to climb, but I think it's farther along in the
Sure, there you go.
trajectory. It's like accomplished more, but it has a lot farther to go than Blue Origin's lander. Blue Origin's lander is still ambitious, but it's not quite as ambitious as Starship.
And expensive.
Yes, it is also. It was by far the most expensive. Blue Origin, not Starship. Blue Origin's proposal was, I believe, by far the most expensive proposal.
Like more than
that was
twice the cost of
submitted
Starship.
to
Yeah.
NASA. Yeah, I think Blue Origin is probably not going to go with the same price for the second round, but I imagine it will still be more expensive than Starship by quite a large margin, because Blue Origin is building the lander just specifically for NASA's HLS program for the most part, whereas Starship will exist whether or not the HLS program happens. So I think
Right.
SpaceX is just hoping to get some amount of money from NASA. SpaceX is not expecting NASA to fund the entire Starship effort.
Exactly.
Look at the after
Yes.
Starship right now. It's getting quite venti.
There's still a lot of vapors down there.
Yeah.
Snate with the super chat just says, thanks guys for all the coverage and conversations. Thank you so much, appreciate it. And Emily says, hey you lovely space enthusiasts, so glad I have you while everything is locked down. Keep it up. Thank you so much, Emily, appreciate the kind words and your support. Greg says, just wanted to say thanks, you guys rock. Thank you.
Nice.
I'm checking a message back here in the channel, and someone is pointing out that we're only 100 subs away from 299,000 subscribers.
Wow.
How many people are watching right now? Michael, can you see? I don't have it up in front of me.
10,000, and I mean, I imagine most of them are already subscribers, but if you're not,
Most of them, but surely
and you
not
wanna
all of them.
push us towards the edge of 300K. We would not complain if you were to click that subscribe button inches closer.
And if you do subscribe, you would receive, notifications for every time we go live with new Boca
Yeah.
Chica coverage, as well as daily updates from Mary of Boca Chica production and things like that. Plus launch live streams from Cape Canaveral and NSF Live every week. So if you're into this kind of coverage, all I'm saying is that subscribe button's right there, and it would I think you would enjoy it. So I'll just leave that proposal there for you. We'll check back on the subscriber count in a couple of minutes.
We're on 299,100.
There you go. All right, we're getting there. Let's see. I got some more questions here. Any precedent for them moving directly to a static fire out of a cryo test? I don't think they've done that before. So not really. We did see them do, 3 static fires in a single day at one point, right? So we have seen them rapidly recycle between tests, but that's a little different from cycling between the same type of test twice and recycling from a cryo test of liquid nitrogen to a static fire test. So not really. I think, and especially at this point, there's only 3 hours left in the window. They're still wrapping up this cryo test, so I think more likely that we'll look for a static fire later in the week. And here's a question here from Barney saying, will Starship and Super Heavy stack fit the height inside the high bay? I don't think they could stack them both on top of one another in the high bay. I think they'll roll them out one at a time, and it'll be integrated on the launch site for orbital flights. That's part of the big launch tower at the orbital launch site. Will need to have a crane built into it to actually put the Starship vehicle on top of the Super Heavy booster. You can stack a full Super Heavy booster in the high bay, which is where the height comes from, but not the full 2-stage stack. And Gone to Tex asking the cost per ship, maybe 2 million. 2 million seems a little cheap. Keep in mind that, launch cost is not the same as cost to build the ship. The ship can be really expensive to build, but if you fly it over and over again, the more you fly it, the cost per flight goes down. So 2 million is very, very cheap. I highly doubt a Starship can be built for that cheaply. launch cost maybe gets there someday. We'll see. But thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. Oh, and here we go. It's like Lavuk, or Lavuke. Geez, it's one of those. I apologize if I'm still getting the name wrong, but I appreciate your
Lavuke.
super chat and helping me try to get it close to it. What did you say, Chris?
Lavuke.
Lavuke. I think that's how you're saying Lavuke. Lavuke, thank you for your support and for putting up with my terrible pronunciation of your name. Let's see here. More. I'm gonna keep looking for some more questions here. Here's a question. Do you think Starship will ever error brake to Lowe's Mars orbit to deploy comm satellites before landing? There has been some talk of like adapting some Starlink satellites for use of communications on Mars, or some adaptation of Starlink satellites. And yeah, in theory, Starship could perform an error braking maneuver to help with orbital insertion. I don't know. There are no firm plans for that yet, but I could totally see that happening. Has there even been a firm decision as to whether a Mars entry or even an Earth entry from Mars would be a single pass entry, or would they do like an air braking maneuver pass and then a re-entry? Has that been firmly? Has Elon said like we firmly decided one way or the other yet?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think they're kind of still looking at that.
Well, I was
But
gonna
as far
pass
as
on that.
yeah, so as far as air braking before like deploying satellites and then landing, I could see that being an option too. Is there any new information about the vertical integration facility at 39A? Any hardware in the works yet? Chris, do we have any updates on that sort of vertical integration tower at 39A for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy?
No, we know some KSC guys who are in charge of equipment going to the pads, like pad leaders, they call them. Now, SpaceX is now owning and leasing 39A, so as far as 39A internally goes, that's SpaceX. But what we've heard as far as equipment going to 39A, nothing yet. But I think it'll be pretty soon, because that'll be the next thing we'll see built there. I think Starship, next production level of Starship pad will be next after that. But I think because of the contracts in the bag, they need to start building this massive structure. It really is a huge structure behind 39A before long, and it will be a lot of hardware going to the pad in trucks and what have you. So as soon as we get a word on that, we'll know, but not yet.
Gotcha. I do membership here. M. Jameson, thank you so much for your support. I'm also seeing a bunch of messages in chat about the frost and pointing out something that I perhaps should have just figured out. But thank you, chat, pointing out that once they vent the pressure, the temperature in the tanks will drop, because that's how thermodynamics works. So yeah, when they start the detank and actually start to vent the pressurization, frost could actually form because it actually does get colder. So thank you, chat, for pointing out the thermodynamics that I should have remembered. And that explains the frost, even though they are likely concluding the test right now. Let's see.
Yeah, I just rewinded, and the actual frost ring you see at the bottom has been continuing to fade, so I
Right,
definitely
okay.
think they are detanking. We're just seeing some condensation right now.
Right.
Hopefully that's a good test, because that will then take them towards what will hopefully be a static fire test in a couple of days' time. There's no roadblock for tomorrow, is there, still?
I don't think so.
No.
Can Starship reach the Kármán line on a suborbital hop without the booster? I believe, yes, it should be able to. So, if they want to test a suborbital flight of Starship, no booster, can't get to orbit and come back, but can get to space and come back without reaching orbital velocity. So, I could see that being some sort of test objective. I'm not sure if it will be, but yes, that is technically possible, so that could be a future test flight for the Starship program.
It can even get to orbit. It just cannot return in that case.
It just can't get back, which kind of
So
negates the
presumably
purpose.
they could do like a 300-kilometer test flight and come back.
Or
something.
even, yeah, that's true. Let's see. How far off in SN11 being rolled? How far off is SN11 being rolled out to the pad? Would they wait for SN11 to come onto the pad before launching SN10? SN11 was just moved to the high bay, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah, next to the
SN11 was
Suburban.
moved to the high bay, and the nose cone was mated on Sunday in Mary's latest video. which I'm going to link right now because people asked. So it's now in a high bay flow, which means technically be what, days away now from being an integrated stack where they could literally just roll it to the launch pad. I think the current launch date for SN10 is optimistic to say the least. So there is a potential of rolling out SN11 to the adjacent pad, adjacent mount. Let's just put that video into chat first of all. There you go. And yeah, it's crazy. It really is, because SN15 is in the mid bay. SN16 will join it, and then you've got just this continual flow of starships. There's no reason now why they won't roll SN11 to the mount. I think with SN10, SN9, it was more a situation of delay related to the FAA, that it took the opportunity of saying, okay, we're not allowed to launch yet, let's roll out SN10. But with SN9 not causing any damage to SN10 during its landing failure, which is what it was, I think they've got confidence now in the two mount system where they can allow for that to happen. So yeah, I think there's potential of seeing SN11 out there before SN10 launches, but we'll have to wait and see.
And we are seeing a little bit of condensation or frost on that methane tank, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll keep an eye on that. That could be interesting. It's always possible they could do multiple proof tests with detanking and then reloading. We're gonna have, like I said earlier, we have seen the frost line go up and down throughout these tests before. So we'll keep an eye on that frost level right now with that upper methane tank, which does seem to have some frost coming back right now.
Got a question here for Chris specifically. Do you think we could have had more progress in spaceflight if we had a competition for super heavy lift vehicles in place of SLS? Thanks, y'all. Chris?
Yeah. Yes, because there was a competition. Would you believe? It was called the racks, which were a design. I can't remember the initials for it, what it actually stood for, but it was a 3-team process at the Marshall Space Flight Center from the Augustine Committee. It was a result of that, where they went through 3 different kinds of variants of heavy lift launch vehicles, and the winner was presented as the forward option to continue with. It was heavily weighted. The competition rules were you had to reuse Shuttle and Ares 1 hardware. So they had all these RP-1 vehicles, like Atlas Heavy and Delta, version of Delta. They had the Starship type vehicles, the methane, Methalox vehicles, but they could not win this trade study because of the rules of the trade study, which was heavily weighted towards the congressional requirement laid out in the 2010 Authorization Act, which said you had to utilize former Shuttle and Ares 1 hardware. It was hilarious. I'm gonna, while we're just going through, I'm gonna try and find the article which shows you the slide. It shows many vehicles, one option, and the one option was SLS. So that's what happened. So yes, there was a trade study, but it wasn't a fair one.
That's interesting. So what could have come from that if that rule didn't exist? Do you think they would have selected something closer to Starship to be developed?
Possibly. It's hard to say, really. I'm just going to try and find the article first of all. 2011, I think it was. Yeah, the winning one, Rack 1, studied inline LH2 core vehicles with solid rocket boosters, SRBs. While this vehicle is based around SDHLV, the teams avoid using such a name, given they were only allowed to trade with space shuttle main engines. So yeah, it was. I'm trying to find what RAC stood for. Hang on one second. It was at the Marshall Space Flight Center as well, so they were always going to favour Requirement Analysis Cycle teams. There we go. Under the guidance of the Human Exploration Framework team, they were given 3 teams to trade study these vehicles. The actual RAC 2 was winning until the weighted decision behind the fact that RAC 2 teams were not using solid rocket boosters. So there you go. It was almost scandalous, if you could say that. But the problem was, if a non-alternative to a shuttle-derived heavy launch vehicle was not selected, if an alternative was selected, they would have to spend so many billions in cancellation of contracts with the Ares 1, Ares 5 contractors that it then lost on the money side of things. So the alternative vehicles, say Starship was around then, would have still lost to SLS on cost, because Starship's cost would have included the payouts of the contract cancellations to Boeing. That would have been billions and billions. So when people start shouting, cancel SLS, you can't do it. The contracts were set up where if we cancelled SLS today, it would cost about $10 billion in contract cancellation fees. That's how it was set up. The people who were in charge of the contracts between NASA and the SLS contractors did it in such a bad way that they did it so that it couldn't be cancelled. No matter how many delays or how many issues it had, it could not be cancelled because it would cost too much. The people saying sunk cost fallacy in our forums don't appreciate the fact that it's not just that. It's the fact that if you cancel SLS, you're still going to pay for it because it's contracted out for 3 or 4 flights. So they pay. Look at the contracts gone to the European Space Agency for the next 2 Artemis 6. They've paid for already. They've paid for it. The service modules up to Artemis 6. If you cancel the Orion today, you're still paying to Artemis 6. It's amazing how the contract's been set up. The contractors had NASA over a barrel, big time.
Really quickly on Starship SN10, you can see that we have seen a lot of condensation on the right side of the tank from this camera angle, but on the left side of the tank, that lower ring of frost we have been seeing has now kind of faded into light condensation, and we're not seeing that upper ring on the methane tank kind of wrap around and form the solid frost. So I still am of the opinion that they are detanking.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Michael. Question here from Steven saying, thinking ahead, do we know how any future astronauts would escape Starship in the event of a launch or landing abort? As far as we know, there are no plans for an in-flight abort system for the Starship vehicle, correct?
Not that we've heard of. Part of me wonders if that could change as like a temporary solution, but we'll have to see how it plays out.
I get to interrupt Michael for once. The drone is flying.
Yeah.
We're behind Starship right now, and the tanks now.
I mean, the only real way I could see an in-flight abort system on Starship is if you had like a Crew Dragon type capsule on your nose cone with Super Dracos that
that separates from the rest.
That's probably super complicated and unlikely to happen. So maybe not.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye because I've got very little time left before I have to get some things done. So thank you for having me, and well done with everything.
Chris.
I shall speak to you all later.
Chris. Thank you so much. That is Chris Bergen, managing editor and founder of NASASpaceflight. Hopping off of comms for now. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Bye-bye.
You know what's really stupid? The space shuttle. I don't like
and
the
Jack's
space
bag.
Oh, boo, space shuttle. Oh, I'm sorry, Crispy. You know I'm kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time. I like the space shuttle too.
Jack's favorite rocket.
I mean, I did say that on a live stream recently, didn't I?
I think you did, so that means it's fact, right?
Yep. Has to be true. Saw it on the internet.
Question here, are you aware that there are TFRs for the 11th? Yes, we are aware. We were mentioning it earlier. That addresses the fact that Starship SN10 flight no earlier than Thursday. As optimistic as that seems, of course, that's very much a no earlier than date. But yes, that we are aware and tracking that. It is contingent on the cryogenic proof test today being successful, and then likely a static fire test prior to flight as well. So we're keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, I just keep telling myself over and over again, net means no earlier than, net means no earlier than, net means no In fact, I just tweeted that as like a jokey response to Michael, and it's got like 300 likes, which is insane, but I guess everybody's sort of feeling the pain of this rapid pace.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I was gonna say I don't think anyone in the world is feeling the pain more than Jack, who has to drive 48 hours or whatever it is between flight tests.
Yeah, and to be clear, I have flown before. It's not a big deal to fly there. That does work. It does present some challenges though. Like, I don't think I would be able to fit the robot on the plane, and things like that. There's things that I bring that I would not really be conducive to air travel. If anyone is wondering, like, why don't you just fly? I take a lot of gear. Also, I use the car that I drive out to traverse the beach, which is really helpful in a variety of different ways. Because you can't really take a normal vehicle out onto the deep sand on the beach. You see, I mean, I've pulled people out. I have pulled multiple cars out from being stuck there on that sandy beach. So it's like it does take a long time to drive, but flying also doesn't solve all the problems. Although it does work sometimes, just to head that question off at the pass. Also, COVID. I feel far more comfortable personally driving versus being in a sort of a sealed tube with other people.
I got actually, you mentioned the robot, and I'm sure Dust would have some input on this, but I know a lot of people in chat ask about, can we see kind of what the robot setups look like and what kind of equipment we use. We do have some sort of behind the scenes stuff in work as far as that goes.
Don't say it's that far a long time.
Well,
it's going to come out tomorrow, but
okay. All right, yeah. All right. Let me be clear. Not coming like anytime very, very soon. But we know that you guys have wanted to see that. So we are working on it.
It's not in work yet, though.
Okay.
We plan to work on it at some point.
Okay,
right now,
there you go.
Right now, we're spending all our effort on getting upgraded robots to Boca Chica for SN10's test flight. The current robots we're using, the ones you were looking at when we were not on Mary's camera, are about $300 robots. So we can have much better hardware now that we know that the existing system works. So we are going to upgrade the robots, but that is the current priority rather than behind the scenes content at this point. Once that's done and we have more bandwidth, we can work on behind the scenes content.
Yeah, and this will be a little bit of a stretch, but if you think of our current robot setup as the suborbital launch pads, the upgraded ones are like the orbital pad. I know it's a stretch, I'm sorry. But in that, the upgraded robots that DOS is working on are far, far more robust and way better in a variety of ways. So that will be pretty cool to get those deployed. And like you said, all of DOS's bandwidth right now is on that, but at some point in the future, to be determined when, not anytime soon necessarily, caveat, etc., weasel words, definitely we need to do something like that. Because I'm on the same page. I want to see the robot factory. I want to do the robot live stream. That's going to be awesome.
Gotcha.
I'm just looking around at different camera angles. That methane line is getting pretty clear. It's always so hard to know what's happening. Yeah, that does kind of look like frost on that methane tank right now.
They just need to install one of those like LED crawls, like a ticker on the bottom, just somewhere around the tank farm. That's like, it just reports whatever the status is. How nice would that be?
Let's go back to this angle. Doesn't look like that frost. Is it wrapping all the way around? It's hard to tell. You got the heat shield tiles on the far left at that level. It's interesting that they put that large heat tile section right on the bulkhead, the common bulkhead between the two tanks. I wonder if they're trying to test something related to possibly some slightly different temperatures in that area. I mean,
that would make sense, right? Thermodynamically, that those two different areas flex and stretch or contract or whatever differently due to the slightly different temperatures from either the fuel or the oxidizer, and also just the bulkhead being there. It seems like that would be a very challenging place to have tiles adhere and stay adhered and all of that. So it makes sense that would be where you put a test patch. Similarly I'm really wondering how the flaps how the tiling around the flaps is going to look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I am still going back and forth on these cameras. I think I'm still going to hold my position with air detanking. I'm not really seeing frost wrap all the way around. It seems like that frost on the bottom is actually on the bottom of the liquid oxygen liquid oxygen tank, if I can speak properly, is decreasing. So I don't think they are loading more nitrogen. I think that's just a artifact of the detanking process, but I have never ever eaten my words trying to predict what's happening with Starship. So with 100% certainty, I can confidently say that there's absolutely no chance they are loading more LN2 right now.
Disclaimer: that was a joke. Like with that speculation.
Oh man.
But,
Yeah,
let's see.
We've
Yeah,
all
go ahead.
learned to not say anything with certainty whenever we can, unless we're absolutely certain, and even then.
Let's see. Question here: do we know what software is used to test flight profiles for Starship? Guessing it is not KSP. I can't rule out that Kerbal didn't at least play a small role in Starship development, but no, they probably had. There's more professional softwares out there. I don't think we know anything about what SpaceX specifically uses, but there's plenty of sort of flight simulation and physics software that can be used a little more productively than Kerbal Space Program.
Let us know in chat if you think they are detanking or loading right now.
Wait, Michael, do your fancy thing where you can. All right, for the next minute, polling is open. Type detanking or type. What was this? What was the other option?
Loading.
Loading. And then at the end of a minute or something, Michael will look at. I'm giving you work. I'm sorry. You can look at the chat and see
It's not hard.
how many of each message. I vote question mark. I don't know. I'm not even gonna try.
Chat is like a 50-50 split based on the eyeball skim the chat message. The methane tank on this one side looks pretty frosty to me, but the liquid oxygen tank looks like more condensation, but it's really hard to tell. I'll show the other angle one more time so you can make a judgment, but I'm still personally of the detanking argument just based on the fact we're not seeing any frost wrapping around the bottom of the liquid oxygen tank like we were earlier, so.
And there's nothing going on.
Yeah, I
with the
think I'm
methane
with you,
tank,
Michael.
right? There's no frosting on the methane tank except for a very little bit at the start of at the bulkhead weld.
Yeah, that's it.
So
Chat is totally split. I'm gonna get the exact numbers, but okay, at 3:25 and 30 seconds, I'm gonna cut off voting.
Okay.
all right, you got less than 15 seconds, chat. Let us know if you think loading or detanking. Just type one or the other into chat. You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cryo. I didn't want to say liftoff.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, I was gonna say hold, but
No. Nice. Oh, good stuff. All right, voting is closed. Stop with the chats, everybody.
Wow,
we'll get the
chat,
numbers from...
chat votes for loading by almost double. It's like 2/3 to 1/3.
Oh wow.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure I'm seeing enough votes. I'm only seeing 118 votes for loading and 61. I thought I saw more messages than that, so maybe like Nightbot or the anti-spam filter was messing with the votes. But
Yeah,
the ratio is
just
2/3
seeing
to
chat
1/3.
scroll by. It seems like it had to be more than that.
I think the anti-spam filter might have gotten involved, but
NASASpaceflight in chat says deloading, which just makes me grit my teeth. Load tanking.
So here's a question for Jack from chat saying, do you think the Starship is what NASA wanted the shuttle to be?
Yeah, this is like a variation on a lot of questions that we get pretty frequently. I do think in a lot of ways Starship is like what shuttle should have been, or I mean, I don't think shuttle necessarily should have been anything too different than what it was. It served a purpose, and that purpose wasn't necessarily just build a space station or put things in space. There was a variety of purposes to the space shuttle, including national prestige and satisfying the defense industry and a number of other factors. That said, I do think shuttle, in a lot of ways, should have never been made an operational vehicle and would have been better served by being a developmental vehicle for a number of years and then moving on to a Shuttle 2.0 type architecture. And there was a lot of there's multiple different vehicles over the years that had been proposed as a follow-on to Shuttle, but for various reasons none of those came to fruition. And now we're looking at what by all accounts really does seem to be in many ways an evolution of a lot of the philosophies behind Shuttle and why it was the way that it was. So
Okay, the condensation level on Mary's camera angle is decreasing on the liquid oxygen tank, so I'm going to continue to stick to my detanking claim.
Yeah, I think I agree. And a lot of people are asking in chat if the test has been successful. We technically won't know that until they move on to the next one. So once they stop making cryo attempts and they start making static fire attempts, we'll know that it's past cryo, or unless Elon says something. But right now it's looking like they're completing a successful... This is consistent with completing a successful cryogenic test.
And
So that's kind of what we're expecting.
The static fire attempt could occur as soon as Wednesday. For whatever reason, there are no road closures scheduled for Tuesday, so presumably they've got some other activities at the pad they're working on Tuesday, but no static fire attempt until Wednesday at the earliest, which makes that Thursday flight date even more tight. That would require a one-day turnaround between the static fire and the flight test.
And that includes, like, FTS installation and stuff like that, so... What days are the TFRs open for again? It starts Thursday, but it's through when?
Through Saturday, so Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Although we know that they try to limit beach closures on the weekends, so they have a TFR for Saturday, which means it's an opportunity if perhaps the weather was going to be perfect on that date and they thought it was their only window, maybe they could negotiate a deal with the county, but it is something they try to avoid, so Thursday and Friday are the most likely options. Although, I think S. Padre on Twitter had tweeted that there's a cold front coming in Thursday, so weather might not be good for that time of the week anyways.
Who's got a pen they're clicking or something? Who's clicking a pen?
Oh, wait, that might have been me. I thought I was muted. Sorry.
How dare you?
Busted.
I'm actually playing with a prototype moon. I don't know. I can't talk about that. Sorry. I have a little 3D printed prototype thing sitting on my desk.
Hot mic on countdown 1.
Let's see. Got some more questions here. Here we go. A super chat question here from Tony saying, "Close your ears, Jack. How many test flights, Starship and Booster, do you think will occur this year, assuming no major failures?" Well, I mean,
at least
they
5.
could hit a pace of like once a month, even. Like if SN10 flies within the next week or so.
Yep.
Another one in March.
Yep.
I don't know, if you figure between Starship and Booster 1 a month, you could have upwards of 10.
Which seems like an insane amount.
Right, it is, but that's kind of the way they're heading. They're heading towards a really rapid cadence. Of course, it took a while for Starship prototypes to get there, so maybe Super Heavy boosters need to like ramp up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, they could hit as 10 or more this year, maybe. I don't know. That would be my answer to that. When is BN1 going to fly? Great question. I'm not sure. They still only have stacked the bottom tank, which is the methane tank. No, that's a lie. They stacked the liquid oxygen tank first, even though it's going on top of the booster. So they only have about half of it, maybe slightly more than half of it stacked so far. There's a big depressurization vent. But I mean, they're still working on stacking it, so I'm not sure we have a good estimate on BN1. Within a couple months, maybe, but other than that, we're not sure. Yeah. A message in chat. Imagine in the future a school field trip going to the moon or Mars. That would be interesting.
I'm getting some Magic School Bus vibes.
Right, yeah.
Mrs. Frizzle.
Let's see here.
Team D-Tank is clearly claiming victory here. But I do wonder though the way the Frost went with previous static fires when we only had one camera. Or previous static fires, previous proof tests when we only had one camera angle. I think we may have, based on what we saw today, I think we may have been wrong when we said that all the condensation, when the tank got fully covered in condensation, that was evidence of the tests happening. I think that might have actually just been the detanking process after the actual pressurization test had happened. Based on what we saw today with our different camera angles, and we could, go around to different sides of Starship and figure out where the frost was, because we did not see, we saw the actual hard frost line was decreasing when all this condensation formed, and we have seen on static fire attempts the condensation increases often when they are detanking. So I'm wondering if the actual previous cryogenic proof test, when we said they were about to do the test, if we may have actually been wrong based on the condensation we saw today.
But now this big long depressed vent definitely looks like an end of test vent, yeah?
Yes, and the condensation is rapidly decreasing right now.
Supercharged question here, does anyone know the changes for SN15? It's already in progress, can't be 3mm steel yet. Elon said major changes. I think we're pretty sure 3mm steel is part of the changes, or at least that's a very good guess. They have the test tank that's out there, which is 3mm thick. So they've had 3mm components already made. So it's possible that SN15 has incorporated that, even though they're still testing it. I don't know if there are other, and that's a pretty major change. That's a 25% decrease in the thickness of the steel. So that's a big weight saving measure as far as keeping Starship strength requirements where they need to be. I don't know if we have any other really good bets as to other things. Some people have said maybe there'll be a more complete heat shield complement to SN15, perhaps a new landing leg design, but those have all been speculation. I think we'll have to yield to when Mary starts seeing that vehicle kind of get stacked and assembled to look for some major changes at that point.
Interesting and slightly unfortunate TFR update, Jack. The 1,800-foot TFR for testing in Boca Chica has been replaced by a 7,200-foot one. So it seems like any low-altitude photography flight from an airplane is no longer going to be possible unless you bring a long lens with you.
Well, it still wouldn't be low altitude, right? But yeah, that sounds like.
Yeah, it wouldn't be low altitude, but you could potentially get photos above 7,200 feet. I think RGV has attempted that, but
yeah, when RGV got pictures of the wreckage from the air, that was from 7,200.
Yeah, correct. So it's possible. It's just not ideal.
Yep. I'm not gonna lie, that's a bummer, but it's also not surprising to me based on stuff that I've heard. And also, I feel like if you're one of our members or if you listen to all these streams, I feel like maybe some of you probably have like Jack's about to go on rant 2A now, and rant 2A, I guess, is it's not always going to be how it is right now. The way that Starship development, the way that Boca Chica is, everything about what we know can change at the drop of a hat. And if what you're telling me, Michael, going forward is that there's a 7,200-foot standing TFR replacing the 1,600-foot or 1,800-foot, whatever it was, so be it. Things change. That's why I drive 48 hours to get to Boca Chica to catch a test, is because we're in the Wild West of Starship development right now, and things won't always be as they are now. So you kind of have to cherish and take advantage of things now while we can.
For sure.
It makes me really glad that I was able to get up in the air, and Mary was able to get up in the air when I was there for serial number 9. And look at that vent. And that is absolutely 100% thanks to everybody's support that we were able to pull that off. Huge. And if I don't ever get to fly around the build site or the launch site at 1,800 feet above sea level ever again, so be it. But at least I got some really cool stuff while you could. I mean, 2
Yeah.
starships on the pad from the air. That's for the first time ever. Like that. I don't know how much you can top that, right? So, yeah, bittersweet, but so be it. These things change.
Long story short, appreciate all the Boca Chica content we can get when we get it, because who knows how long it's going to last. And hopefully SpaceX is not going to build huge walls everywhere. I don't think they could hide everything. I
no.
certainly think we're going to have some form of content for the foreseeable future, but to what
Yes.
extent that's possible remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's necessarily a matter of like, oh, what if they build a giant wall or something? Because just look at they built the giant wall. And look at what you're seeing right now. We see straight over the giant wall, almost to the bottom of Pad A. So, not a big deal. Thing is we've talked about this even on this stream. What if Starship reaches some operational state or some state in its development where they're like, right, okay, pick everything up and move over to Florida, or start building them in Cape, at the Cape, and maybe they'll still do some work at Boca, but stuff gets moved behind closed doors, and that's entirely possible. I mean, we don't know what the future holds, but I'm certainly glad that the present and the past have been as awesome as they have so far. I mean, just imagine driving around Cape Canaveral like with a Saturn V on the pad, being like, "Woohoo! I'm gonna drive exactly over here and climb up on this specific dune because I've done it before, and I know that this dune will give me a good sunset, and it's like 100 yards away from the vehicle." Like, it's just bonkers. You just couldn't do it.
Got some more super chat questions to get through here. Hannah, aside from firing all 3 engines on landing, do you think there has been enough time to make any other changes to the Raptor engines to correct for the SN9 landing failure? So talking about actually fixing the main actual Raptor engine problem. Keep in mind that they're installing new engines on the stand, or on the vehicle, that have been tested on test stands already. If they already know what the Raptor engine problem on SN9 was, they can then look for that same problem on the other engines and make sure that it's not there. So they should have had enough time to do that inspection and figure out what the actual engine problem was. And assuming that they have done that, then they should be able to make sure that that is not present on the new vehicle. So yes, basically is the long answer to that. And then another one here from Steve saying, is there any rough estimate for the payload that a future double-wide Starship and Subaru might get to orbit? So this is talking about Elon's mention of a future evolution of the vehicle that could go to 18 meters diameter. And I don't think there have been any payload estimates for that kind of vehicle, no. It would depend a lot on how they scale it up, if they scale up the height as well. What kind of propulsion system if it uses, if it would still be the same type of Raptors, or if they scale those up even. So no payload estimates for that yet. How will Starships be able to perform pre-flight tests on Mars due to time delay and likely not having most of the SpaceX pad crew and Stargate team to ensure flight readiness? Well, so if you're talking about Martian launch operations, you can program a lot of that to be done sort of autonomously, and then the time delay is 20 minutes or so. So you could do all those tests and then hold for 20 minutes. Or I guess it's a round trip could be up to 40 minutes before an actual go command. But you can program a lot of those checks in. So what you can do is set up the program, and if at any point the Starship onboard computer sense any set of failures or things that don't look right, you abort the countdown and stand down, and then the engineers back on Earth would look at the data, apply some fixes remotely, and then do the countdown again. So Starship can go through the countdown likely on its own at that point and abort if needed. You don't need to have direct communication with the engineering teams on Earth to actually step in and abort a problem if it arises, because Starship can do that itself. That's how most launch vehicles actually operate. All the pre-flight checks are done by the computers, not by humans. The humans are just monitoring the issues. And just a reminder, if you have questions in chat, you can tag us with @NASASpaceflight, and we will try to answer them best they can. I'm still looking at the queue and trying to pick out any good questions that we can answer here. As far as a status update on the actual test, it looks like they are detanking and completing the cryogenic proof test for today. It looked to be consistent with a pretty successful test, so but we won't know for sure unless Elon says something or they move into the next test, which would likely be a static fire test. And like Michael mentioned, we have road closures not for tomorrow, but starting again on Wednesday. So that would be the next day for testing after today, unless that changes. And there are also flight restrictions starting as early as Thursday for a flight. So that's our schedule update, assuming today's test is successful. Got a message from John Kraus Photos in chat. What's up, John? Thanks for tuning in.
Who's that?
It's just some photographer from here in Florida. I don't know if you know him.
Ah.
His name's John Kraus. He's a pretty great guy.
Is he any good at what he does?
Yeah, he's pretty good.
He's all right, I guess.
He's alright, I guess. Shout out to Mr. Kraus there. Let's see. Oh, what does TFR stand for again? TFR stands for Temporary Flight Restriction. So that's basically an airspace closure to protect any aircraft in the area from Starship operations and launch operations. Let's see here, what else? What would SpaceX do if a cryo test fails? Well, it depends on how it fails. I mean, if it fails like explosively and the vehicle pops, at that point you're kind of scrapping the vehicle and starting with the next one. As far as if it's just a small leak, they can go and repair the leak and then continue testing. All depends on what exactly the failure mode actually is. Do you think each Starship flight will need someone trained on board when flying passengers similar to a pilot in an airplane? Most spacecraft these days fly almost completely autonomously. That goes to Crew Dragon. Even Soyuz doesn't have a whole lot of crew interaction, I don't think. And I think, given Crew Dragon's pretty much autonomous operation, I would think SpaceX will have a similar idea for Starship. So, not necessarily needing crew on board that are capable of so-called flying the spacecraft. All crew on board will likely have to have some basic training on just operating systems in case of emergencies and things like that. But that's not necessarily the same as being able to fly the vehicle. As long as the vehicle is still in contact with like ground control, they can kind of handle those kind of issues from the ground. So probably not, but I suppose it's not impossible that that would be a requirement. Using NASA's view on propulsive landing for human flights as an example, how do you see Starship getting certified? So you're talking about propulsive landing with humans on board for Starship. So the precedent for that is likely Crew Dragon, which was at one point planned to have propulsive landing. The only reason that didn't happen is because NASA said, well, you would need a couple test flights to prove that that's reliable, and said that we don't want to pay for those test flights, so if SpaceX wants to go that route, they have to, pay for those test flights on their own. And SpaceX said, well, we'd rather not do that, so could we do parachute landing instead, which NASA would pay for those flights because that's less of a risky approach and kind of already proven on other systems. So it's a matter of funding the test flights that actually certify the missions. Seeing as SpaceX development is going to continue regardless, and all of these Starship test flights are working towards proving that propulsive landing, I don't see that as a big obstacle for NASA certification as far as putting their cargo or crew on board the vehicle. Musical Wolves with a super chat. Is this amount of cryo testing normal for Starship? Seems to be taking longer than other starships. I think this is pretty normal for cryo testing. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this seems about the usual to me.
I don't know if we have any actual numbers in front of us right now, but I don't think this is actually out of the ordinary for cryogenic testing as far as Starship goes. Question here for Super Heavy. Why have 26 Raptors or so underneath instead of just scaling up the Raptor to 3 times the size, thus 3 times less engines needed? It is a lot easier to have clusters of engines on board than to scale up an engine. Scaling up a liquid-fueled engine is not a trivial task. It is much simpler to have just more engines. It also gives you engine out capability because, and we've seen this with Falcon 9. This is part of Falcon 9 development too. That if an engine fails during launch, the flight can continue using the other 8 engines. Same thing will apply for Super Heavy. If a Raptor engine fails, the remaining Raptors will be sufficient to continue the flight. So, yeah, so there's 2 benefits to that. Scaling up the Raptor to a bigger size is not actually that trivial. Would be a lot of work behind that. Very much likely easier.
And
John, I see your message in chat. You can't just scale up a CAD file. That's not how that works.
And it looks like the Thomas launch TFRs have been replaced by new TFRs, which have a minor modification. And that minor modification on the new TFRs is to say launch pending auth. So auth is obviously short for authorization, so FAA is making it clear that they have not authorized this launch yet. We've seen some confusion with the public getting confused about if the TFR being posted meant that the launch had been authorized, which clearly is not the case from previous incidents, but the FAA is now making it clear in writing that when they give a TFR, it does not mean that the launch has been authorized, and the TFRs now say that. Again, launch pending auth is what the TFRs now say. So that means that SpaceX does not have a launch license for SN10 yet, although, of course, they could receive that launch license in the coming days.
That's interesting. So we'll keep an eye on that, but still, that does sort of indicate at least a potential target of no earlier than Thursday. And we got a message here from Mary that's saying there's a vehicle headed to the pad. So that would be another sign that they are actually completing today's test, and they're reopening the pad right now as we speak. Should show up in our camera view pretty quickly. I think this is the camera view with the best spot of the road to the pad, right, Michael?
We have a wider one as well, but Mary, we do have some cars. There you go.
Yep, there you go.
Pad reopened. We'll mark that off on our timeline. So, I mean, if I had to guess, it was a successful test. Of course, we have to get some form of more definitive confirmation, like a static fire attempt on Wednesday, but we will also check in with Mary and see if the roadblock has been opened. If they open the roadblock, that would be another good sign. That would confirm that they are done for today, and Mary just confirmed that as well. So we will move our final status on our timeline as the active status, which is the road open mark. So we have completed the timeline for today's test. It looks like that is all for today's coverage. So comments, I think whenever you're good to wrap this up, we can do that.
Sure thing. So to recap, after an abort earlier in the day, or at least an apparent abort earlier, and a brief return to the pad did clear again, and it looked like what appeared to be a successful cryogenic proof test, a sort of nitrogen leak test on Starship, which prefaces an eventual static fire and launch attempt. Pending more official information, we don't see anything that would indicate that today's test wasn't successful, and it was consistent with previous successful tests. So looks like a successful day of testing, and schedule for the rest of the week. Again, no road closures tomorrow. So like some other type of work going on tomorrow. But a static fire test could then occur maybe no earlier than Wednesday, and then according to airspace restrictions, pending FAA authorization, the launch could occur as early as Thursday. Again, that all of course depends on a successful static fire test as well. But that is going to do it for today's testing. Really quick, one last super chat here from Chuck Oak. Thank you for your support. I also want to extend a big thank you to everyone who watches these streams, especially everyone who's sending in super chats and joining memberships. These streams cannot happen without your support, and we are continuing to reinvest that into improving and expanding our coverage. Also, Michael, do we have the member thank you screen to show up on this?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so we'll do that too. Just a big thank you to our top tier.
Oh boy, it's a good reminder to me that I have to get to work to make the font size smaller because
Oh yeah, because we keep running out of room.
looks like we have room for maybe one more row on the launch director line, but not much space. So thank you all for the amazing support. It was about 1 year ago where we had about 3 names on this list. So
Right.
actually, it was less than a year ago. It was in March where we started the membership program, I think. So thank you all for the support over the past 11 months.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a big thank you to all of those members. And of course, a big thank you to everyone who simply tunes into these streams and hangs out and puts messages in the chat, asks us questions. We really do appreciate it. I also want to give a huge thank you to the team behind the stream. Of course, we got Michael Baylor handling the production side of things, helping out with some questions and doing some commentary as well. I know if I talk long enough, there we go, he'll put his info on the screen. He also, of course, is the manager of NASASpaceflight, which is a great app for launch updates and Starship updates, including, if you go to whenhop.com, that's where you can see the latest as far as road closures and Starship testing is concerned. So big thank you to Michael for joining us today.
Yeah, look at that sweet... Oh, I just talked over Michael's sign-off. But look at that sweet Vandenberg selfie. I mean, come on. If someone has a Vandenberg selfie as their pick, you know they're legit.
I think Pauline took that photo, so thank you to you, Pauline, for that. And I think I need to update it next time we go to Vandenberg. So remind me, Jack, I need you to take a photo, or Pauline or somebody else to take a photo of me next time we go to Vandenberg, because that is from Iridium 7, I think. I think that's Iridium 7. I'm not positive, but that's 1.5 years old now, at least.
Quality stuff.
We also got working in the back channel a little bit, also working on the robot factory, but I know he's in comms, so I'll shout him out really quick. Das, or also known as John Galloway, the other production mastermind behind the stream, so thanks to Das for his support today. Also got Jack Beyer joining me on comms today. Jack, thanks for joining us, photographer and video editor and commentator extraordinaire for NASASpaceflight.
And massive fan of the Polar Quarter.
Oh my god. Were you guys... you guys were talking about that earlier, weren't you? I almost jumped in.
Nope, we were not.
I don't think we were, but we can talk about it now if you want.
No, I don't want...
I hate it too. I'm teasing Jack about something I also hate, so...
We don't acknowledge the Polar Corridor on these streams, but yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And like we were saying a few moments ago, to all of our launch directors and flight engineers, to have... Look at that methane truck go.
Oh, yep. Some more food for Starship SN10.
To make the font sizes smaller and smaller and smaller like that is a really, really good problem to have. And we wouldn't be able to do this without everybody's epic levels of support. So I feel like at a certain point we're going to have to make that screen like the end of a pharmaceutical commercial where it's like just reads everything out really fast, like I'll have to record somebody saying it and then we'll speed it up like 300x. Thank you, dude. Like go through all the names. I don't know. It's a good problem to have, is my point. So thank you everybody for all the support. Thanks for watching. Until the next one. Hopefully I don't have to get in my car and drive to Boca Chica tomorrow.
Thank you, Jack. I also want to give thank you. Chris Bergen joined us on the stream.
I predicted you wrong.
Yeah, I was saving the best for last, Michael. Come on.
I forgot about Chris. That's what happened. I forgot.
Chris Bergen was on the stream earlier with some commentary as well. He's not on anymore, but thank you to Chris for joining us. And then, as Michael tried to predict, the last but certainly not least, the person behind all of our Boca Chica coverage, Mary at Boca Chica Gal on Twitter. If you're not following her on Twitter, what are you doing? You got to follow her on Twitter. That's where all the latest updates as far as Starship go. are concerned. Mary, of course, down there every day doing photography and video of the production site, and all of that gets edited up into daily update videos on this YouTube channel. So huge thank you to Mary, as always, for helping out with the live streams as well. And if you like the content that she is giving us as well, her and the Robot Army, please feel free to subscribe to NASA Spaceflight, and we will have live coverage of big testing events like this in Boca Chica, launch coverage from Cape Canaveral, and of course those daily videos from Boca Chica, and lots of other very cool Starship content. My name is Thomas Burkhart for NASA Spaceflight, signing off. Thank you so much for joining us on today's stream, and we will see you next time. Later, everybody.
Thomas, wouldn't it be really funny if I said "Go Yankees" and then cut off the stream?
Propulsion continues to be normal.
The chamber pressure looks good. Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Water towers fly! Flight downside, FD off. FD off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Let's go Mets. See you, everybody.